This is Atomic Shinobi and today I am going to narrate first part of What If Naruto was Coyote Starrk. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Everyone in the area could clearly hear the word. It didn't mean much on its own. Unless you know the situation, the sound of clashing steels and other explosions reverberated throughout every corner and altitude of a town that had been devastated by war. How could such widespread devastation go unnoticed when it must have been difficult to overlook a clash between individuals wearing black or white and fighting with unimaginable strength? The whole battle goes unnoticed. Is the answer? All of this is a result of the countermeasure to isolate the conflict on a different plane, with the exception of the residents. The area they are fighting in is a duplicate of the town. There is a war that could upset the balance of the spiritual world, but only a few people are aware of it. The Shinigami and the Hollows are engaged in combat. In essence, the Shinigami are responsible for maintaining the harmony between the material and spiritual realms. But it was a horrible day when one of their kind betrayed everyone in order to gain power. The situation worsened when Soul Society as a whole discovered that the traitor had been manipulating their affairs all along without anyone noticing. Former 5th Division Captain Sosuke Aizen is currently in charge of an army of specialized hollow soldiers. Long before his treachery was made public, he had assembled them, and they are reinforced by the Hogyoku. He created his army of Arankars by tearing down the walls separating Shinigami and Hollows in exchange for their allegiance. These Hollow are granted the abilities of a Shinigami. They now work for him and support his goals. His goal is to become a god and transcend all races. He must sacrifice 100,000 souls in order to make an artifact that will allow him to enter the Spirit King's realm and take his place. Under the command of Captain Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto of the 1st Division, a Sotecho, the Shinigami have prepared and trained for the day when the traitor's plan will start. Since Ichigo Kurosaki, the Shinigami Daiko, defied orders to free their captured friend Orihime Inoue, they have prepared their defense. The Sotecho therefore hypothesized that the infiltration of Hueco Mundo by him and his companions was the first stage of whatever scheme Aizen had devised, and he was confirmed to be correct when Aizen and his group eventually emerged over Karakura. The war has thus officially started. Together with his other henchmen, Aizen brought the 3 most powerful Espada with him to combat the Godai 13's forces. They each went their separate ways. The conflict has been ongoing for a while, and each battle was gradually coming to an end. The one with the title of Primera, who is supposedly the strongest of them, is the only one remaining. Coyote Starrk. According to the so-called Primera Espada, no one should hold his current position. At first, aside from the female with blonde hair, he doesn't exhibit any violent or haughty characteristics that are typical of the ranks that were present. It was assumed that his participation was solely motivated by duty rather than desire. It was common sense, though, to never let one's guard down given their ranking system. 2 of the Godai 13's oldest and most formidable captains, Jashiro Yukitaki of the 13th Division and Shunsui Kyoraku of the 8th Division, confronted him and his Fraccion and partner, Lilynet Gingerbic. Oddly, they didn't begin their fight by announcing threats or bragging about their abilities. On the contrary, it started off with lighthearted banter and idle conversation, though the girl did the majority of it. The irony of the situation is that both parties are required to fight each other even though they would prefer to resolve it amicably. Despite having no interest in any of these matters, Stark felt compelled to do so out of loyalty to Aizen. Earlier, he had to analyze and counter Shunsui's moves, which made the battle boring. But when he saw the Bankai, the full unleashed power of a Zanpakuto, of surrounding captains, his curiosity was aroused. He felt a stirring desire to see how strong a Bankai could be. He revealed that his Fraccion was not just his partner but also his other half when he published his Resurrection a long time ago. He clarified that because of his immerse power, he was able to split his power to another being, in contrast to other Arankar who sealed it in a sword. Now, in his liberated form, Los Lobos, he stood in front of them looking like a Western gunslinger, complete with a fur-lined vest, holsters and warmers, and 2 ornamental pistols. His eyes, which had previously been indifferent, were now burning with a desire to overcome every challenge. This obstacle mimics the shape of Captain Shunsui Kyoraku, his adversary. Similarly, the flamboyant captain transformed his Zanpakuto into a Shikai. He possesses a very unique kind of power. The blades not only resemble 2 enormous Dao swords, but they also have abilities that can influence both the wielder and his opponent. It has the ability to make any kid-friendly game with potentially harmful outcomes real while enhancing his character. Both the wielder and his opponent are expected to abide by any rules and boundaries established. The Primera's skills were so impressive that he was able to compete with a Shinigami of captain level. When the other captain and 2 others of the same level entered the battle, his strength was further increased. Nevertheless, he managed to overwhelm them and defeat the 2 newcomers. However, Shunsui's performance in the color game, Irony, in which both teams select one, was the pivotal moment a color decides the damage his opponent will sustain. The damage is commensurate with the bear's color. However, there is a chance that the caller will also suffer harm as a result of the retaliation. That's what happened when Shunsui yelled black. He slashed at the black hollow hole on Stark's chest with the discard of his white Captain Haori, exposing all of the black cloth of his Shiakusho. The cut was a fatal one as he heavily bled. Stark fell to the ground after finally losing his grip to stay afloat. Shunsui can't help but think of his opponent as he calmly watches the dying Arrancar accelerate downward. His face was emotionless, but something else was happening in his head. Despite being perceived by many as a slothful flirt, he is a highly esteemed individual who cherishes self-respect. Even though he makes an effort to use logic to resolve disputes, he still likes to spar occasionally. Additionally, sparring with a friend would motivate him to perform at his highest level. Given their close friendship, it might have been influenced by the 11th Division captain. There was a distinction between holding back and holding a trump card. Even though he never revealed his Bankai, he had wanted to explain that to his opponent. He observed their similarities. One amusing possibility is that he is his long-lost brother. Because of his playful personality, he therefore views a portion of this game as a friendly competition to outdo one another. However, he remains conscious of the fact that he is up against the enemy and he had prevailed. He was lucky to have been pushed this far by the battle. A part of him thought that if the Arrancar had fought unenthusiastically, it wouldn't have been much of a victory. Despite his eccentricity, he wanted both fighters to give their best effort because a warrior who fights without a purpose is merely a puppet. It was therefore inappropriate for him to feel a twinge of happiness that the once reluctant Hollow was now fighting with great vigor and in accordance with his code of honor. He never looked away from the dying warrior, quietly expressing his admiration for a worthy foe. He has to depart now to complete the remaining tasks. Coyote Starrk soon decided it was sufficient to allow the clasp of a second death to take control as his life gradually dwindled, but none of them knew about a presence that lurks in the shadows and has its own agenda. Well, I suppose this is it. Finally, that final one, and a deadly one at that. It's odd that the pain feels somewhat numb. The blood loss must be the cause. Sigh. I suppose the only thing left to do is wait. Although I couldn't think of a more appropriate way to go, I could have hoped for a less problematic one. Being a Hollow and all, we kind of deserve to die in combat. I'm beginning to see things, which is strange. Is this what they meant when they said that when you die, your life passes before you? It must be the blood loss once more. However, I don't believe that's feasible. We don't remember anything before the day we divided our power. It's also possible that I thought neither of us had any of our original form. It doesn't matter anymore if that was the cost of escaping loneliness. The way a soul felt prior to transformation creates a Hollow. I must have lived a solitary life. If that theory is accurate, then, to lessen the emptiness I felt, I would prefer to forget everything. Therefore, it's possible that these belong to someone else. The memories of the Hollow we have eaten are visible, but given their quantity and diversity, they ought to have been distorted. I used to have sporadic flashbacks of people's lives back then, so it's not unusual. However, one memory in particular keeps coming up. However, I have been there, so I am familiar with this one. It tells the story of a blonde boy who feels incredibly alone. For me to feel this way, I must have eaten a very lonely soul. I was sad for that young person most of the time. I see him grinning, but like Jin, this is merely a mask to conceal his pain. I hoped he would have found tranquility. Unfortunately, it can't be. I'm not sure why, but that one memory made me feel as though there might have been others who were similar to me, someone to whom I could have confided my pain. I experienced a sense of kinship during those periods. Kinship. This is how I felt about that Shinigami, Shunsui, if I'm not mistaken. He was quite a strange guy, don't you think? Who am I to judge, though? He was a clever and crafty opponent. He hasn't even released his Bankai, and he gave me a little trouble. So much for trying your hardest and failing. It's odd how his Zanpakuto match every game feel like a deathmatch, or did it do the opposite? It kind of fits him. Strangely enough, I don't think he would have played tricks on his adversary. If he had, he wouldn't have hinted at the rules. Somewhat trustworthy and honorable, but still able to appreciate the small things, like me. Ha 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 ha. It's amusing how similar we are. You are powerful as well. I would have happily embraced the idea of being allies in any other situation. You gave me the odd impression that I knew someone just like you, lazy and laid back, but strong when called upon. Or perhaps it was a Hollow I ate a century ago. I don't know. Although releasing my resurrection was a pain in the ass, I suppose I'm still not strong enough. However, since I'll be dead anyhow, I'd like to express my gratitude. Who would have guessed that I would struggle to defeat anyone? I stopped wanting to be strong a long time ago because I kept believing that the stronger I remained, the more people around me would perish. However, you did. I briefly had the urge to get stronger, to keep fighting, to defend my friends. Companions. The taller, white-haired friend of yours also exuded a similar vibe. Your friend, was it Jashiro? Was also somewhat intriguing, based on what I remember Lilynette telling me. Even though we were on different sides of the battlefield, He maintained his honor by avoiding our conflict. He was thus forced to spend time with Lilynet. He continued to irritate her and treat her like, well, that was funny, a child. It seemed to me that you Shinigami don't care who your adversary is. There is no question as long as they are on the other side. However, I suppose that like us, there are people who have different ideas about how to find peaceful solutions. You gave the opponent some time to be seen as more than just an enemy, a point to people like me, but a deadly chance to others. That means that, if given the chance, I would prefer to resolve conflicts democratically. As long as it doesn't take too long. It would have been amusing to watch her become agitated each time he dodged, if I hadn't been preoccupied at the time. However, I sensed something from her when we united. We are all too familiar with that feeling, the sensation of being undervalued, which I am aware Lilynet detests. I felt depressed and frustrated that despite her best efforts, she was not considered worthy of anyone's time. Then comes the fear of being alone forever, the sensation from which we believed we had fled. What did any of this have to do with my loneliness? If he had brought that pain back, I would have killed him, but I chose not to because of what he has done for her. It's not like me. He acknowledged her in his own way. The comments, the advice, and even just fighting, laughing with her made her feel a little happier. That tiny bit of recognition gave her in us a glimmer of resolve. I don't know to what, however. Why? Have we ever met? Why does it seem so familiar? I don't get it. What's causing my feelings? Emotions. The hostage also experiences this odd sensation. Although I never met Inoue, I find her interesting based on what I've seen. She was a shy little girl, laughs, but she had a big heart, was loyal to her friends, and was kind. She loved them so much that she was even captured. Then, based on my observations of her stay in Las Noches, she continued to be kind even when things didn't seem to be going well for her. Something was in her eyes, too, but what was it? Hope? Willingness? Have faith? I was drawn to her a few times, as if I truly wanted to get to know her. However, I never followed through on the idea because I thought it was merely a passing curiosity. However, the subsequent feeling is extremely unsettling. I experienced loneliness once more. It's followed by another one, and I don't understand. I'm not positive, but fear follows. What connection exists between the two? She brought back memories of my early Espada days. Sometimes when I remember that blonde boy, I saw a little girl somewhere in the background. Actually, if she hadn't aroused my interest, I doubt I would have seen her in the shadow. Her eyes, a brilliant white that gleamed like the moon, caught my attention. Did she have blindness? If so, she had a greater range of emotions in her eyes than Tucson did. Her eyes, which are said to be the window to your soul, are wide open. I also noticed that she had the same feelings as Lilynet. Her loneliness was evident to me. I don't know why she gave the same vibes as the boy. But when he prays or cheers her up, I saw something else. Something strong and vibrant. I saw in her eyes a great resolve with a spark of happiness. Strangely, the Inoue girl also gave of a similar aura when she was near that orange-haired disaster, like a simple spark that set ablaze. So is the fire that burned in her soul. Interesting. Chuckles. I may not know much, but by the look of this, he was her strength. I wonder if it would have been different for him if only he noticed. He seemed to be the oblivious type as far as I can see. But there was one memory of her that moved me. I saw her eyes again, but it no longer held any strength or resolve. No, she was crying, and I saw it. Disbelief, sadness, despair. Again, I also saw her loneliness, only worse. All hope I remembered was not there. Why? Why was she crying? Why does she resemble Inoue? Was this the reason why I was so hesitant to harm her? Was this why when I retrieved her, I felt like being stabbed in the hole in my chest? If I remember right, the pain right now is nothing like that back then. Was this the heart? The one Ulkoira keeps denying? Chuckles. I bet he would go on a drawl out with me knocked out before it's even half started. I wonder if it would have been funny to them. Neutra and Grimjow would have giggling uncontrollably. Everybody. Although I always wanted to believe that we were best friends, I suppose I must admit that we weren't. I wished we could have a drink or two together, but everyone seems to be going about their own business. Strangely, I dreamed of being the laughing stock of Hueco Mundo. Since we were the strongest, we would have defended one another a long time ago. I would have gladly done it. However, I suppose that idea was shelved because no one asked. Half of the Espada, I believe, would have been uninterested in the idea, and the others would have had time to wonder if I was crazy. You all still had a place in my heart, though. Haha. Listen to me. Either Ulkoira and I could start a debate right now, or Zale would ask for permission to analyze me. However, knowing that there are people just as strong as me helps me feel less isolated. Sosuke Aizen is a common denominator. Aizen, if my prediction is correct, Aizen will now depart from us. It should undoubtedly be extremely disappointing to see the Primera Espada fall. Your plans never had my approval. I found it to be too violent and dishonorable. However, I didn't disagree with it either. I continued to try to avoid the hassles that would have likely resulted from it. However, I hoped there was a better way. As long as the Shinigami don't bother us hollows, I don't really mind them, simply a means of keeping both sides secret. But didn't you have to use the destroy and conquer strategy? However, thank you for everything. At first, I thought you were making a deal with the devil, or something similar. However, you have provided us with companions, which we had long desired. We owe you because you never left us alone. But even though I thought you couldn't be trusted, there's another reason I'm prepared to stand up for you. I didn't say it out loud because it would be considered petty. Something rose up where my heart should have been when you formed the Espada and named me Primera. It was something like that. Call it impossible for our kind. Lilynet was correct. You might not realize it, but you thought I was deserving of the top spot for giving me that job. I experienced a sense of purpose and irrelevant closeness to wholeness. It gave me the impression that I should do everything in my power to earn your trust. The paradox of doing what's best for me and having faith in you. It's ironic, but we believe what we want to believe. I probably would have worked harder to help you achieve your objective if you had just made a little more effort to guarantee our complete loyalty. I'm not upset. I'm just disappointed that you weren't more concerned about Barrigan's death. However, that's just hypocrisy. I didn't contribute much to Aranierro's demise. I guess I won't be able to pay you back, though even so, I wished it had been in a less bothersome manner. However, we are grateful that you saved us from the darkness. Lilynet, I'm done. If you can still hear me. Not anymore. We are not going to make it through this. I apologize, but there is nothing left to defend. It would soon be over. However, I felt like I gained something from this fight. A surge of power passed through me for a brief moment. No, I don't think I have any additional skills. It felt like something else. Actually, like something lost and forgotten for a long time. You don't know what it is when you find it, but you know it's crucial. However, Lilynet, you are also significant. You are a different creature, even though we were once one. You are my sister, my dear people, and you are more than just a friend. And I would have wished the best for you, as any decent brother with sound judgment would have done. I keep wondering why you seem weaker than me, but I'm not sure how. Not negatively, but since we were once one, we ought to have had equal authority. However, that in and of itself convinced me to be your brother in order to keep you safe. However, it didn't keep you out of trouble, did it? Laughs. However, I promised that we would always be together, no matter what we do or where we go. I also never break a promise. I wonder where all of this is coming from. Could all of this be felt by our kind? We are hollows, so how is that even possible? These recollections feel much more intimate and familiar, as if they were truly mine. However, none of these make sense to me. I sigh. The mind is moving at a breakneck pace. Zale would probably enjoy entering my head at this moment. Even so, it's amazing how much I've been contemplating before everything comes to an end. I never imagined getting worked up over something. But for some reason, thinking about them made me feel good in my last hour. I am thankful to keep this in mind. Thank you. I know now I'm not by myself. I'm going to take a very long nap shortly after all of this, so there's no point in whining about it anymore. However, the cramps are becoming bothersome. Perhaps I ought to get off the ground. Help. Cramps. Floor. What the? Very few things interest or surprise the Primera Espada due to his passive nature, and those that do, he tries to avoid at all cost. Not that he is afraid, but he prefers not to deal with the problems. But this does not describe how Coyote Starrk is reacting to his current state. The face of the once bored Espada now held a wide variety of emotions, mostly confusion. He is troubled by the fact that he is in the middle of the town that has been torn apart by battle. Alive by all logical sense, that last blow should have killed him. Now he is here sitting among the debris contemplating on this peculiar event. He was still in his resurrection form with only the eyepiece that is missing, though ragged and scratched. The wounds under the cuts were gone. Even the hole on his chest doesn't look mutilated. He concluded that he is in functional order overall. How is this possible? He questioned in a weak voice, hoping to get an answer somewhere. An unsettlingly rough voice yelled from behind him, because I willed it. The same principle is also applied on fear, and those that frighten Stark are indeed troubling, but frighten is too mild to describe the fear that is welling in him for so long due to his intense Ryotsu. Little to none could stand his presence, so he took out all threats when he was a hollow. Although he viewed Aizen as threatening, he wasn't afraid of him. Both parties stand to gain as long as they reach a mutual understanding. The Shinigami was so forgiving of him because of this. This, however, was not that case for the first time as far as he could remember. He doesn't know how to respond to the possible danger. He is distressed when it moves behind him without his knowledge, because it shows that he is aware that the intruder was either stronger or on par with him. However, his observant side tells him that since he is still alive, it won't hurt him just yet. Just like his first meeting with Aizen, Stark sensed that business is afoot and decided to get it over with. He got to his feet and cautiously glanced over his shoulder to assess the stranger's appearance. In order to conceal all traces of his limbs, the figure wore a white robe that extended down over his entire torso. The opening in the middle shows what appears to be his chest, which looks skeletal and purple. A length of black chains bound together by a terrifying-looking mask encircled what he believes to be its waist. Its narrow face, with two blood-red horns protruding from its forehead, was the same color as its skin. And to finish its fearsome visage, it had a knife clenched between its fangs. A long rope with dangling charms that held small bells hung from his neck. He was unable to make out the creature's face because it was hidden by the robed person's hood and was enveloped in a deep shadow that, in his opinion, was impervious to light. All he could see was that it had long, white hair, which, judging by the size of the hood, was most likely wild. However, that only serves to highlight how tall it is. Possibly as tall as Yami. Ironically, he would have referred to it as Barragan's Oriental equivalent if it had donned the mask. If the creature's appearance wasn't frightening enough, its very existence filled him with fear. Though he is aware that this is the most dangerous kind of enemy, the former Espada felt nothing. He made an effort to feel something, or at least determine how powerful it was, but nothing came. He is aware that the person in front of him controls his life. Stark chose to start the conversation since she had no idea what would happen to him and thought it wouldn't matter anyhow. "Who are you?" is how the conversation starts. "I know you are a perceptive type even though many think otherwise, but then again I doubt the fool you followed would have known my existence because his obsession would have overshadowed mine," the man replied. If he was referring to Aizen, Stark considered every topic that might be of interest to his former employer and came up with one suitable response. "I don't suppose that you are the Soul King, are you?" He only received a shivering laugh that made him shudder inside, but he remarkably maintained his neutral demeanor. The being responded, "Now why would a king place himself directly in the path of the one who wished to overthrow him? But I commend on your effort because it could be half right. I'm just fulfilling the king's will. His command isn't whole without mine, just like you and the girl. When you became whole, his rule is absolute, and those who deemed worthy of his attention are graced with his presence. I will give you another chance. What do you know of this Soul King?" "I suggest looking underneath the underneath." The Primera was taken aback to discover that the response was incorrect. He was certain that the thing in front of him was the one Aizen wanted to destroy. He was at a loss for a reasonable response. However, he let his brain work extra hard to figure out this mystery, beginning with the hints that were omitted. "Excellent," Stark thought cynically. "I'm beginning to detest a riddle. All right, let's see." He claimed not to be the king. He didn't say that, and he rejected my response. He didn't deny it, though. However, the response was half right. He added that without him, the king's decision is incomplete. Is this a relationship with someone? Maybe an advisor? Perhaps. But how? Why does he yield to the whims of those beneath him if he is so powerful? A king cannot rule in that manner unless he is extremely democratic. And what will soon adorn his presence? Even though I'm slow, the fact that I'm still here indicates that I attracted the attention of a very influential person. However, the man in front of me continues to deny that he is the Soul King, or at least gives the impression that they collaborate partners. No. Having two kings in a kingdom will cause enough chaos. Aizen is a good example of this. Even though he technically got caught up in the overthrowing stage. UUUUHHHGGGG. The headache. Maybe a clone. Ha ha ha, unlikely, he said, but as he gave it more thought, his laughter turned to seriousness. Or is it? He brought up my condition thus. He might actually be his soulmate. No. Something else must exist. However, the fact that he denies a half indicates that he is a distinct entity both times. It was the same but different, a shadow of his true self. Maybe a hollow, like me. Not only that, but Soul Society is ruled by the Soul King. Thus, a hollow king is as likely as Ulkoira. Grinning, Soul Society. Hold on, Shinigami, and a look of recognition of the identity of the entity before him appeared in his eyes. "By the looks of it, you finally discern who I am." The entity with the title of the King's Blade laughed and said, "You're his Zanpakuto too?" Stark was a little perplexed as to whether he should be offended or concerned. Indeed, as I recalled, fail once and after learning from it, succeed in ways that surpasses all expectations of many. You are correct, I am the King's Zanpakuto too. But as a general title, my true name would only be revealed if my master wishes it. But how are you here without him? Unless he is just nearby, a Zanpakuto's spirit cannot be separated this far from his master. Stark responded. He learned this information from a lecture he overheard Jin giving while she was looking for someone to bother. But all the spirit could do was laugh. Ah, by the standards of Sarate, yes, that is the case. But if you remember, this concerns the Soul King. The sole ruler of the entire spiritual realm. His power encompasses all aspects of this realm, and he reveals judgment to every soul that transcends both planes. His power exceeds far more than that brat called Aizen could ever attain or believe. He cannot leave his realm to ensure the balance, so thus he entrusted me a portion of his power to perform his will in this plane of existence. Then Stark looked surprised, but he was actually in a panic. Then why are you here? if Aizen catch wind of the Soul King's Zanpakuto being here, who knows to what length his madness will drive him. However, the creature composedly responded to his outburst, saying, "This no longer worries you because he is being held back by the obstacle that can and will surpass him by the only threat that he feared. To put it plainly, the king sent me to judge you, but we are veering off course." At last, Stark exhaled in relief, but his expression changed to one of a defeated warrior as if he had lost all sense of direction and purpose in life, similar to what happened before he met Aizen. Oddly, he had a smile as well, but it was devoid of humor. His sole response was, "So, this is it then." "Indeed, though I am disappointed that you are not protesting," the Arrancar merely shrugged. "You used to fight for anything you believed, or at least go down fighting, but it shouldn't be surprising since you also held that look that day." This left Stark perplexed. "I'm sorry, but what? For so long we thought that he no longer existed. The news made a selected few, dead, to a whole new level," was all the being said as he ran on. "I think you had me confused with someone, but if it is a soul I ate, I assure you that I did not become him. Then we were fortunate to find out that this individual is still alive. It was an odd sight to see them enter the throne room, but the boss thought it was funny. But when we realized how much he had changed, both mentally and physically, surprise didn't adequately describe us." "Again, what are you talking about?" His voice was now irritated. The fact that this entity keeps discussing a past he doesn't have enrages him even more. To get away from the loneliness, he threw it away. After appearing to ignore him for a moment, the spirit finally acknowledges the Hollow, who is gradually changing his expression from one of perplexity to one of rage. "But it seems like you might lose who you were because of time and events. Given what you've been through, I suppose that's a reasonable explanation, wouldn't you agree?" Naruto Uzumaki. "Last chance. What are you tall AARRRGGGHHH?" He dropped to his knees and gripped his head, once scrunched with anger. His face is now twisted in agony. The assault of numerous memories that he thought weren't his own is the reason for this. He is still able to recognize that despite their diversity and the fact that the majority of them have endured traumatic experiences, many of them share a common trait. The blonde child he kept thinking about. How can they let that thing join the academy? A failure, always a failure. You can't even beat me. You. Stay away, you. Why am I always alone? Monster. Look what you have, you WORTHLE. Treason. The council sentence you to be exec. I'm sorry, but this is the only way. Dobi. You can never. You are the Kyuubi." At last, he recognized that he was the blonde boy and that these memories were all of him. He was Naruto. He wanted to think about it, but everything he is going through keeps getting in the way, and it's not just the overload. In brief pauses, he pondered how he, the child, could have endured such suffering. Nothing makes sense, and all of these are too much to handle at once. In an attempt to ease the pain, he chose to concentrate on a particular memory. Not pausing to think, he combed the countless memories for a specific one. He believes that this will provide enough focus to temporarily forget the suffering and fulfill a personal goal. He wants answers of how it all began, how he died. He found himself in what seems to be the prison chamber due to seeing himself as Naruto bound in chains and iron bars separating the room from a long hallway. Due to seeing it through the boy's eyes, he cannot determine the look on his face. But through as far as he can see his own body, he winced at state the boy was in. Numerous cuts and bruises littered the skin that wasn't covered by what little clothes he has on. The most noticeable wound was that on his chest. It looked like a heated object was shoved through him, missing the heart but damaging surrounding tissues. It looked hastily healed, but it is still bleeding. He experienced every bit of Naruto's suffering. But what he felt inside, on what he believed as the heart, was far more excruciating. There were all the negative feelings he could articulate. Among them were feelings of anger, sadness, despair, and betrayal. However, all of these feelings were overshadowed by the person he feared the most, the person whose suffering he had wished to avoid. He felt isolated. He can't stop thinking about how lucky he was. If he had seen Lilynet in a similar state, he couldn't have imagined what he would have done. Then he heard a screech and a loud slam of something metal. If the sound of approaching footsteps is any guide, he believes it was a metal door. He could not see who was in front of his cell because the room was dark, but he could tell that there were two people, one of whom was shorter than the other. "Okay, demon. Time to get up. We all had been waiting for this moment, and now is the time for you to get what you deserved," the one who was larger yelled. "Enough. We should not delay this any longer. The stage is already set and the village is getting restless. Let's get this over with." The shorter of the two growled, and if he's listening correctly, it sounded rough and feminine. "Prepare the cuffs." "Cuffs? I thought you had them," the woman snarled. "You idiot. How could you? Never mind. Go upstairs and get a pair. I'm sure there is some in the storage." "What about you being here with that thing? What can he do?" this specific cell is lined with seals that disrupt chakra flow and the shackles continuously drain him if he thinks of doing something funny. Now get the move on, she yelled, and closes the door. We don't want anything to get in or out. As the man started to walk away. But I thought you said, just precautions, now get going. When he eventually departed, the hall was filled with the sound of a heavy metal object crashing. He came to the conclusion that Naruto was anticipating the impending verbal abuse because he felt a certain familiarity with the circumstances. He heard, Byakugan. Even though it was quieter than a whisper, he was shocked to hear a gentle, light voice rather than one that was harsh or coarse, similar to a young girl's voice as in. That voice was familiar to him. He can't seem to remember her name, but he knows it's her. She was the white-eyed girl who looked up to the boy. The person in front of his cell was much smaller than the one he remembered earlier, and it was dark. He can see her eyes, but he can't see any details of her appearance because his eyes aren't focused. He would have thought he was looking into two moons in the night sky because they were still the same shade of white. However, because they were so full of tears, the once bright eyes have turned dull and are only reflective. When he first saw Lilynet, they were full of feelings that haunted him because they resembled his own so much. Even in between sobs, she stated clearly, Naruto, I have so much to tell you but there isn't much time. He sensed that Naruto was about to reply, but she interrupted. I want to apologize for all of this. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were in need. I'm sorry that I wasn't strong to defend you. I'm sorry that I didn't do anything after all you have done for me. When he heard this, he experienced a wave of mistrust and disbelief. He believes that Naruto was suspicious of the generosity shown to him, but when they looked at each other, it all disappeared. The girl's words were genuine, but he could still see the despair. She wanted him to feel a little happier and meant every word. You were wronged because they thought you were the Kyuubi. Naruto's eyes widened in fear as his head snapped up. He felt betrayed by the statement alone, but before he could consider the worst, she said something else that made him feel the shock of his former self. But you were strong because you were not what they say. She eventually lost it, but she managed to stay upright. You are still my strength. I wish I had told you this sooner, but it is now too late. I want you to know, no matter what. Stark began to lose control of this memory, but he persevered in the hopes that she would finish speaking to Naruto. I will always love you, and Stark was thrown back with that realization. Everything was happening at once, and he was unable to process it, but since he was only focused on the confession, he didn't seem to notice any of it. He stumbled as he said, I was loved. I was never by myself. Someone was open to spending time with me. He tried to come up with reasons why his past self didn't know of her. When he recalled some memories, he finally received his response. A girl with pink hair was the target of my attention. I kept doing anything for her, yet she only insults or ignore me. But what he observed in these events further intensified his guilt. She was somewhere in the back. She was observing from a distance, silently appreciating his accomplishments and feeling sorry for his shortcomings. She was always there. I was the boy who didn't know, as they all said. I'm a fool. He scolded himself as he chastised himself for contributing to his own misery. Tears began to fall out of his self-pity. It was blurry due to all the compressed memories, but he had enough to create a synopsis of his brief existence. He was depressed that he was alone in life because he possessed a destructive power. He was Kyuubi no Kitsune's Jinchuriki to keep everyone safe. He turned into the beast's prison and restrained him. However, he was still despised by the people he lived with all his life. He was treated like dirt. He made sacrifices for years in order to win their approval. Even though he had a few people he valued, they weren't enough to defeat the vast majority of people who hated him for being him. Even though the final section was the most hazy, he made an effort to identify the incident that ultimately led to his demise. He attempted to save a boy who he thought was similar to his brother. The boy's hatred, which showed no remorse at all, radiated from him. The land would have been ripped apart by the explosion. The fact that Naruto was able to bring him back, but received an unfair punishment because people he trusted abandoned him, he felt betrayed. The most vivid picture, however, was of Naruto accepting his fate at the hands of the traitor. The boy he saved, whose once black eyes were now blazing red, was charging at him with lightning encircling his arm. Even though this story still has flaws, anyone can figure out how it ends. What worries him, though, is that he noticed something is off with this image during the last moments of life. Even though the boy was frowning, he appeared determined, but he didn't think it was out of retaliation or bloodlust. What he believed to be regret was visible in his eyes. For example, even though he is prepared to make a sacrifice, he still feels regret for what he did. He only dimly recalled the boy, but the incident that followed led him to firmly believe that he was the kind of person who expected everything as long as he gets what he wants. The Arankar doubted that he would ever regret anything. No, he wasn't the one. He was perplexed as to who killed him because this is not what he saw in his executioner. He was so emotionally spent that he was finally relieved that the pain was gradually going away. Then, in the remaining years of his previous life, he made some noteworthy notes before everything vanished. A cage, red eyes, tears, and black and red A. His eyes were not on anything, but they are still open finally, after what seemed like an eternity. Stark came out of his reverie. However, he now appeared exhausted, as if the little life he still had finally left him. Then gazed up at the Zanpakuto 2 with eyes that had lost all of their luster and belonged to a person who had experienced true despair. "Why?" Stark said in a deadpan tone. "Why'd I know all these just now?" The only response he received was, "What do you think?" But it sounded more like a statement than a question, as though the spirit is aware that he can respond to it. After reflecting on all the events that transpired, Stark finally understood how it started when he remembered some of his conversations with his significant other. When me and Lilynet became one, she would talk about unexplainable memories. Rarely, his partner's sobbing would wake him. Later on, she would reveal that her nightmares involved being beaten and alone with someone. It was only now that he realized its origin. She shared some of Naruto's memories because she was a part of him. He was about to ask, but why were they broken memoir? Of course, the question was promptly addressed. Whatever Naruto did to break himself apart, he somehow broke his mind and somehow created both of them using a fragment of the original. He concluded some of his memories came back when they were whole again. The remainder either fragmented or merely a feeling of what he recalls. He believed that if time passed, the fracture might mend and all of them would be restored. Now, however, none of it mattered. He has his judgment waiting for him. With his disheveled hair now casting a shadow over his eyes, the fallen Espada said blankly, "So, this is my hell then? To have the answers to so many questions in front of you, yet they are still beyond reach. Living my days knowing that I wouldn't suffer solitude if I wasn't such an idiot." As he was saying this, he can't help but wish that Lilynet was here. He had reconsidered, though seeing the one person he held in the highest regard suffer the same fate as him is too painful for him to handle. When he saw the girl's dejected expression from his past, it was already too much. "I apologize to Lilynet, but it appears that I will not be able to fulfill our commitment. You can't accompany me this time. No matter where you are, I made the decision to endure this pain by myself, but no matter what, I love you, Lilynet, and I will never forget you." With his head lowered, the former Prime Minister Espada accepted his fate. After all of this, however, he was troubled by something. "May I make a request?" The creature looked down and said, "It depends on what it is." Its voice may have sounded blank, but it was laced with curiosity. He thought it was useless, but he had lost interest in it, so he inquired. Even though his voice was still dead, the Zanpakuto 2 could tell that there was a glimmer of hope in it. "May I know what happened to her?" He was aware that it was stupid, almost pitiful. It was pointless. He knew, however, Stark is aware that what Lilynet or Naruto would have done is far more important than his pitiful request. "If we are going down, we go down kicking their asses," she might have yelled, and he would have chuckled at the parallels between her and his. No, their former selves. No matter how dire the circumstances, they would never give up. He wished he could do that in order to live a happier life. He wanted to know if the girl had moved on from him. It pains him to think along those lines. However, he desired the reassurance that she is no longer alone. The only solace he expected was that. However, reality still sets in. All he's doing is postponing the inevitable. If that request is approved, he will only recall more suffering. The fallen Arrancar is aware that he is at the mercy of his judge, but he doesn't think that someone with that much authority would compromise on something so trivial. He still hoped, though. He desired to have hope once more. Very well then. He did hope, but he wasn't prepared for it to happen so quickly. The Zanpakuto 2 granted it, which surprised the Primaria. Jerked up so quickly that his head should have snapped off. His eyes widened in shock as he saw the spirit moving away, quickly replacing his earlier dejected expression. Although the majority of it is already among the trash strewn across the street, he saw the ghost move toward a store with a big window. It used a hand the same color as its skin to grasp the knife that the mask was holding. It thrust slowly, aiming the blade at what was left of the window. Something strange happened the instant the knife touched the glass. It failed to penetrate it. Rather, it passed through it, creating ripples like water. Shards drifted around the blade while it was still in the glass, reassembling it into what was left of it like a puzzle. The window returns to its original state as the cracks gradually disappear. The glass, which had been transparent, became opaque. The colors began to distort into unidentifiable shapes. Stark is aware by now that his request is being fulfilled in this manner. He now waited for the events to unfold in front of him while standing next to the spirit. As the scenario becomes more apparent, the image begins to take shape wherever it's happening. The former Espada noticed, it kind of looks like a dojo. Then he saw that the room was occupied by 3 people, 2 of whom were engaged in combat in front of the person watching them. The observer is a middle-aged man wearing a robe that appears to be for daily wear but still has signs of being expensive. A severe face with a deep frown was framed by brown hair that reached the shoulders. His eyes, which are also as pale as the girl he remembered, are another clue that he wasn't happy with what he was seeing based on the subtle movements of their head and eyes. Stark now thinks that it must be a family trait and that they can see perfectly. However, all of the girl's feelings were completely at odds with his. It was limited to icy stares, almost glaring, and brimming with feelings of disappointment, annoyance, etc. He then saw a girl who, if he bases it on height, was about the same age as the one he remembered. She was dressed in what looked to be a dark training shirt and parts that were loose enough to allow for her movement without being too tight. Then he saw that she looked somewhat like the girl from his past and had white eyes just like the man. He is still confused by everything, but he is certain that she wasn't her. Her eyes were as intense as the man's, but not as much. Her long brown hair and matching frowning face gave Stark a sneaking suspicion that they were related. He did a double take at what was around her eyes. As if that wasn't unsettling enough, there was a noticeable pupil now when he looked at the girl's eyes again, and the veins were bulging enough to make it noticeable. According to the Arankar, this family trait possesses a unique ability. When he finally noticed the final figure, he silently chastised himself for missing it. Out of all the monotone, the person was the only thing that caught the eye. Her blue hair was the only thing that brightened the gloomy mood, in all the muted tones of brown, white, and everything in between. She was taller than her opponent, who was obviously older than her, although he chose to argue that he might be mistaken if his current status is any indication. Her build was more mature. As a result of that, she is dressed similarly to the younger girl for training. The former Primera would have been less concerned because he displayed and received the same courtesy as the late Tercera. Nothing, but even though it was a little loose, it still displayed all of a woman's distinctive curves. However, his eyes widened in surprise at a realization as soon as he fixed them on her face. She was the one. Her pale eyes that rocked the foundation of his past are still there. However, he saw that hers was a shade of violet in contrast to the other two, who were merely pale even though she had the same obvious veins around the corners of her eyes. This was untarnished. He questioned whether this was one of the reasons he seemed drawn to her. However, he also observed some noteworthy alterations. Her once shy and constantly avoiding eye contact eyes have hardened and become focused. She's only looking at her opponent. Stark struggled to explain it. The eyes were cold and hard. However, he became suspicious that it might be a defensive front after noticing small shifts. Stark decided to focus deeper, though difficult, and saw what was behind such nearly impenetrable shield. It was similar when he tried deciphering the mysterious right-hand man of Aizen, but it wasn't much due to only seeing his eyes only once. Held in those white orbs were emotions well hidden to those who don't know what to find. They were vague, but he was able to identify some. Loneliness, sorrow, guilt were a few he could identify, and it saddens him that still held them, but he was confused of one particular emotion that seems to be greater than the negative ones. Perseverance. The Hollow wondered what gave her such resolve that outweighs the emptiness. He decided that is best not to be known. His heart, which is essentially non-existent, might be broken. He decided to be content on watching her, possibly for the last time. However, when he saw her face, he couldn't help but let a random thought cross his mind. It might as well be years for her to mature this much. He only pays attention to a small number of things, and even then, he finds it difficult to categorize them all, so one may guess that anybody of his nature have very little and simple criteria. The only benefit, though, is that if he said it, he meant it. As he considered comparing something, her past and present, he was oblivious to this. Funny, all he could describe of the girl in the past as cute and the present as pretty. Strangely, he felt that it was insufficient, and he is a little perplexed as to why he thought he was missing something. Still, he kept observing the spar. The former Espada's analytical side began to emerge as they exchanged blows. He guessed that this style entails striking at key vital spots to either immobilize or incapacitate the opponent, because he frequently used the palms and evaded moves. If his memory serves him correctly, he may have also had experience with this style. According to what he recalled, the Arankar believed it was a family technique because the practitioner's eyes played a significant role. However, he immediately observed the disparities in the combatant's execution. The shorter of the two was more focused on hitting the most prominent crucial areas and was stiff. He thought she was stiff and likely adhered to the traditional and conventional forms of fighting because of how fixed her stance was. He began to recognize a pattern and wondered if anyone else could see it. Her, on the other hand, is solid but looser. She was more of a dancer with the elegance of water as her element because of her graceful and fluid movements. That does not imply that her actions were subdued and innocuous. No, Her position was more effective from the Primera's perspective. She can dodge strikes and then exploit her opponent's overextended moves because of her flexibility. Every action is not in vain and is followed right away by another. He concluded that the initial blows are effective diversionary because they contain little force, and that a stronger blow follows her was less predictable than her opponent's, and it might take some time to read it thoroughly. There, a faint blue aura covered the hand as the smaller one struck her abdomen with a significant amount of force. There was an arm close by. She could deflect it, making her opponent unsteady and vulnerable to any crucial blow. However, Stark was surprised the blow touched him. What took place? Why didn't she at least avoid or block? Was his judgment incorrect? As the Primera watched her take 4 more blows, each to the limb areas, these were the thoughts that went through his head. Then she was thrown across the room by a hit. She was unable to get back up and was lying on her back as she lay there. Stark watched her with sorrow. The Arankar turned to see the man speaking to her icily. "Pathetic," she said. "After all this years, you still cannot take down your sister. I will commend that your speed and evasion had improved, but nothing more. You are still weak and a disgrace of even bearing our name. How are you to lead a clan if you are too soft? You don't even deserve to know how I was right to make Hanabi the heiress, as it was a waste to even bring you up." Whatever cores inside the hollow, anger boiled up. "Sister, is that how you treat your family?" His tolerance for mistreatment of allies, even family, is beginning to wear thin as a result of losing the only family he ever accepted and the loneliness he now faces in life and death. "Hanabi, you are free to leave. She won't be able to move her limbs. She won't even be able to mold chakra enough for any use," the man said, turning to face the younger girl. With a nod, the girl, now called Hanabi, opened the door and left. First he followed shortly after, but paused and faced her once more. He left some icy words before closing the door, though. "You will be able to move sufficiently enough after 10 minutes, so by then, you better leave this room so others may put it to good use." Stark didn't have to guess who he was implying with venom when he said, "It was because of him that you became like this." His earlier anger was swiftly replaced by guilt. He looked back at the girl who had fallen. "I apologize," he said, annoyed that her name had not been mentioned during the entire event. He wanted to apologize properly, but it wouldn't help. He finds it hard to believe that she was at her lowest even when he saw her for the very last time. How much lower can they both go? Byakugan. How much time did he spend daydreaming? Stark looked at her all the time. The entire time, he was fixated on her. Although he hasn't kept track of time, he believes the man must have left a few minutes ago. The man either underestimated her or overestimated the damage. She simply replied, "Yes, father, I agree. I became like this because of him, but you don't even deserve to know how." And it's clear from the way she spoke to him that they both felt the same way. She remained silent as her breathing gradually returned. The Primera's mind is beginning to race once more as he attempts to create scenarios based on what he has seen. However, she spoke before Stark could come up with a convincing explanation. "Naruto, she still thinks of me," Stark said, unsure of how to respond to the indirect reference. Despite being Naruto, he didn't think he should be called that. However, he paid close attention. As she said, "I guess I have become like you. I am alone." He winced. "Because I loved you." The Hollow was experiencing contradictory feelings at the moment. Happiness. She still harbored affections for his former self after all these years. Sadness. The disillusionment that he has lost his identity. The tightly held mask fell off, exposing the vulnerable girl behind it. "I don't care what they all say. You are still my strength, so I decided to hide it. They don't deserve to know." You continued fighting. "I will too." Tears slid down her cheek, an act that Stark unconsciously empathized with as his own eyes watered. "Many times I'm not sure if I could go on, but you saved me and I don't want to tarnish your memory. Everything changed. I wished that I could have done something, anything, to save you." She pauses as she silently wept, but quickly pulled back together. "I don't want to run away anymore. I won't give up, so I will continue fighting. Maybe, in an honorable battle, I might go where you are. So please, wait for me." He feared the heartbreak if she knew what happened to him, where he had gone. With intense sadness, he didn't realize he said it aloud. "I'm sorry, but sadly it cannot be." An aura of despair that could have been greater than that of his colleague surrounded the Primera alone. It could have brought anyone to their knees, except his current companion. Thus the silence was broken with stating the obvious. "Do you want to see her again?" "Yes." He questioned why, if it was hopeless. He still responded, "No matter how bad things get, Uzumaki Naruto never gives up." Was that him? Alternatively, Lilith Gingerbik, who wishes to do as much harm as possible before being crushed, or perhaps Coyote Starrk, who yearned to be among like-minded people? They all seemed to combine into one desire: to return to her, though he wasn't sure which. "Very well, it can be arranged." The day's theme seemed to be surprise after surprise, and Hollow, who had previously been stoic but was now depressed, experienced another wave of shock and incredulity. He finds it unbelievable that he has the opportunity to spend time with her. However, his analytical side, which was triggered by what Zanpakuto 2 said, is preventing him from accepting the offer. Suspicious eyes narrowed at what the spirit had to offer. So what's the catch? It said, catch? In an unconvincingly perplexed tone. He had already made one deal and paid the price for it. Not to be disrespectful, but let's say I didn't read the fine print of my last contract. Wouldn't it matter? You will be able to see her again? Stark pondered for a moment. This was his opportunity, but he was suddenly acting very cautiously. Yes, I would have, but won't a place like Hueco Mundo be a lot quieter if this was a common offer? So why am I special? He anticipated that the creature would become enraged for turning down such a kind offer. He positioned himself so that he would at least make Lilith and Naruto proud if he were to leave now. However, he received a laugh of amusement, which added shock to the day's ever-increasing pile. Incisive as ever. Good, because you would have faltered if you haven't kept your priorities in check. The proposal we are offering is a mission, so to speak. You will hear us out, won't you? Stark nodded to listen, unsure if his death could be any more embarrassing. From what we have observed, a great storm is about to befall to not only your former village, but to all surrounding it. With what that village has turned into, we saw that upcoming disturbance would have been a justifying factor to them. There was a long silence, and Stark knew there was more. But I cannot tell any more, but let's just say that there are some you don't want to be swept away. Then why don't you guys fix it? After all, how difficult was it to allow it to happen to a particular person if they could prevent his death right then and there? I'm afraid we cannot. We aren't allowed to meddle with the affairs of the living, for doing so would disrupt the balance. That is why we only intervene enough to give a unique individual the power to cross boundaries. It is then up to them whether they make the right choices, like that boy. The former Espada questioned why go through all of this if their authority outweighs any commands he is familiar with. Sigh. Then why not order me to fix it? He asked. What do you believed about destiny? That didn't matter now, however. He shrugged and responded based on what he remembered hearing. Don't know, something about your future already set in stone because of what everybody believe your past is. There was a frightful silence between them. All instincts to flee or hide erupted for a brief moment. The Arankar then listened to what the creature had to say. The tone remained the same, but he sensed that the response was unsatisfactory. Then wouldn't hollows be as they are, hollow? The void? Yes, but? He could have argued, wouldn't your kind's sole instinct was to seek destructions to replace the void created in life? But he recalled some members of the ranks who hated violence and only used it when there were no other peaceful options. He was a Jinchuriki, the prison of the beast rather than the beast itself. Wouldn't that village have stood till now if you were what they claim you are? What you heard was a false definition of fate. Every human being is given a choice, and it is up to them to decide which path will shape their future. It is not predetermined. These two are frequently confused, but fate is determined by your own decisions, not by those of others. If we decide to deem someone worthy enough for us to intercede, we must have strong faith because, despite our position and power, we cannot take away the power of free will, something that Aizen and someone want to take away. So what is yours? He was deeply affected by everything the spirit said. Someone had put their trust on him and it brought all sort of pressures. Stark felt his desire to take it. Damn the consequences. He was still uncertain. Though flustered, he voiced out his indecision. I am not sure what to make of it. Do I even deserve it? The Zanpakuto 2 noted the change and knew it got his attention. What do you know of your other title? Another irrelevant topic, but he knew otherwise. Let's see. Knucklehead, idiot, demon, unpredictable. Wait, a demon. What does it have to do with anything? Asked Jinchuriki. It sounded almost frustrated when it said, do the math. How about it? Hold on. Kyuubi 9. A flash of insight came to him as he recalled a red-haired boy. He recalled the bloodlust-crazed look in his eyes. However, upon closer inspection, he realized that he was just like everyone else. Alone and carrying a burden that they had not chosen. There are 8 others like me. And a lot more than you think, but now you know one of the objectives of the mission. He vaguely recalls the moment when 2 people in black coats with a blurry red mark nearly caught Naruto. I'm hunting him for what he contained, the 2 said. You mean to protect them? It's up to you. This mission is more like a bounty than anything else. The contract is set for a result. It is up to you on how it will be accomplished. The Hollow's curiosity gradually grew, and he was curious to learn more. Then what are the other objectives and what is exactly my mission? That is all I am allowed to reveal, but we are certain that you will eventually discover it. The reward is that you will have a chance to attain what you lose in life. As he considered the offer, the former Espada remained silent. What ought I to do? How would you respond, Lilith? He sincerely hoped his significant other was present to accompany him in this momentous choice. Throughout the conversation, he considered pulling away from her on numerous occasions. However, he recognized that this plan was hampered by numerous factors. Above all, they were unable to recall how they had initially broken up. Furthermore, it is unknown what would happen if they were aware of the procedure. How would the damage be different this time if they didn't look like Naruto after that? Lilynet, I made my choice. I apologize for leaving, he said, feeling oddly that she would have agreed with his choice and somewhat eased his heavy heart. All right. You got me. The Arrancar could swear that the smile on the mask had moved an inch, but he was unsure if he was still losing blood. Excellent. So how will this go? Technically, I am still dead. The Primera wondered whether it was attempting to be humorous when it said, that is something for us to know, and for you to wonder. Ignoring the deadpan expression, the spirit went on, but if it is your desire, we can send you back as who you physically were. The ex-Spanish player merely shook his head. He turned around and said, no, I'm fine as I am now. The aura around him was a mixture of regret and despair, but his eyes were no longer hopeless. It won't have been the same because my other half embodied him more. Naruto is now dead and I don't deserve to wear his face, so can I go as I am? It is your choice. You will still retain all your power as an Arrancar. I do require a considerable portion of your Riryoku to make you a new body that can withstand your immerse Ryotsu and to also limit it to prevent others from being harmed, so expect that your control will be a bit off. Stark thought, so practically I will be brought back to life. Not like those fake bodies I heard before, but a real, live one. He unintentionally moved his hand to his chin as he continued to think. However, it brushed up against something sharp and smooth along the way. The Arrancar was drawn to this because it highlighted a specific detail. Will I still have the mask? Again, it's your choice. I can remove the hole as well to make you more human. The offer that is made. Stark thought about it. Can I still keep it, both of them? He could picture an eyebrow being raised, even though he is still unable to see what is underneath the hood. A strange request, please explain. Stark gazed only down at the two distinguishing features of his new self. He could use an excuse to conceal the piece of the mask. However, the hole won't be covered for very long. It will be found eventually. I feel the emptiness not only in my heart, but also in my mind. I wish that till I fill up both holes, it will serve as a reminder of my purpose in returning, and besides, I'm more or less not human now. Even in the shadows, he sensed the creature's curious look once more. I had believed that your purpose was the girl, and maybe the others like you. All he did was shrug. I thought so too, but I guess no matter how you see it, I am still not sure what. You are a strange one indeed, but it will be granted. So are you ready? He sighed and his stance returned to the slouched sloth that Las Noches had come to know. No, but whatever. The Zanpakuto too turned back to the window after giving what appeared to be a nod. However, he was reminded of something by something that hit the hollow. He asked a question that was bothering him before anything else happened. Out of curiosity, was there a particular reason why you showed me her? The response he got was succinct and direct. Incentives. Figures. He scowled as he saw Zanpakuto move closer to the dagger that was still pierced through the glass. But as soon as it came into contact with the blade, the power that emanated from it almost knocked Stark back. To avoid being carried away, he pressed harder on his legs and covered his eyes. Stark was able to regain his footing in time to see a familiar sight after the invisible force subsided. A Senkaimon, a conventional sliding door, is in front of them. However, he saw some significant differences right away. Its entire structure appeared aged, as though it had been inactive for a while, and it was larger than those used by the Shinigami he had previously seen. The most distinctive feature is that it was fastened shut with big, black chains that reached to the door's four corners. These chains are all attached to a big, elaborate lock, and the dagger inside acts as a key. With a loud click, the chains are released and noisily drawn into the lock after the ghost turned the dagger. Slowly, the door screeched open. In contrast to the standard Senkaimon, which greets the user with light, this one greets them with darkness. At first, Stark thought it was a Garganta because it was so dark, but when he looked more closely, he saw that it was a tunnel surrounded by dark, moving masses rather than an endless chasm. When the Primera realized what he was looking at, his eyes widened. A Dongai. How in hell is this going to happen? Know that you are not doing all this alone. Stark turned to see what it meant, but was stopped by a sharp pain. His mind reeled from the suddenness of it, and the air was knocked out of him. He noticed that, just below the hole, the Zanpakuto had stabbed its hand into his torso. Even though his vision was getting darker, he could still hear what were likely the last words spoken by the spirit. You were wronged for a crime that wasn't yours by the unjust. However, the judge has decided to restore your innocence. Now go back, get back what you lost, do what needs to be done. And let your revolution run wild. Darkness. It surrounded a dark forest, and the sound of an approaching storm only made it more gloomy. There was no life stirred except for the fluttering of leaves, but the monotonous rumbling of the sky was broken by the sound of scampering feet. A silhouette emerged from the bush and reached a clearing, its shape hidden by the foliage's shadows. It was revealed by a brief flash of lightning. It was a little fox. We could clearly see another flash in its condition. It was too dark a red to be natural on closer inspection. However, it became clear why. If the multiple wounds and the limp in its front paw were any indication, it was covered in blood, most likely its own. It was breathing heavily, as though it were fleeing something. It was impossible to tell from what. However, the sounds of footsteps approaching are becoming more audible. The fox had become feeble. It is no longer strong enough to run. All it did was stumble to the closest tree and wait for its captor. Then there was a heavy downpour and a loud crack of thunder from above. The fox's blood was washed away by the rain, revealing only the other wounds beneath it. In addition, the rain brought out a different hue that had been obscured by the red. A tiny metal plate was attached to the blue collar, but because it would be covered in the red liquid, it would be hard to see it sooner. The fox appeared to be in a state of surrender and submission as it remained motionless. The splattering sounds of footsteps are approaching while little light remained only revealed a vague image of a mob that is slowly drawing nearer. The fox's eyes were dead to the outside world and it only looked around for a while. Then all of a sudden, a mighty bolt of lightning struck the area on where it stood. The group was momentarily blinded by the sudden flash. When they were able to see again, they searched the area for their target. It won't matter, though, because what they witnessed was sufficient proof of the fox's demise. The fox was last seen on scorched ground. They didn't have to look for the body anymore because the tree the fox was standing close to has now fallen and caught fire. The crowd applauded in the hopes that their prey would perish. And now that night had fallen, the forest was illuminated by the moon. Time went by. The forest was different, but it was still identifiable now. A lot of the trees are bigger, but obviously something wasn't right. Few leaves remain on the now thin branches as the majority of them wither. The few that are still thriving were gathered around a clearing. In the distance, the remnants of the tree that is now the fox's grave were found there. Tall grasses must have grown around it over the years. Overall, it was a striking image of isolation. However, a figure that was approaching broke it. The moon strode toward the tree, its identity obscured by clouds as though it meant something. It paused close to the tree and examined it. Then the clouds parted, revealing the enigmatic guest in the moonlight. There was what appeared to be a breathtaking sight. It was a wolf. It was covered in a lot of dirt, but that didn't detract from the whiteness of its coat. It was illuminated by the moon, giving it an ethereal appearance. Its eye, is where its potentially flawless complexion was tarnished. Its left eye, which was kept closed, was marked like a flame. A blue orb is seen gazing at the tree in the image on the right, comparable to the ocean's depth. It was a dark shade of blue that revealed equally profound intelligence and experience. It sensed a disturbance and twitched its ears from the shadows of the nearby trees. It could see a small group moving toward it from behind. It simply waited patiently for the incoming intruders without displaying any signs of distress. They turned out to be a small pack of wolves. They approached the white creature slowly, some nervously. Unlike the narrowed eye that revealed nothing, they all had their eyes wide open, as though they were afraid of a ghost in front of them. Still, both sides kept their distance, waiting for any signs of hostility. With its passive attitude, the white wolf turned to face them. Between the two groups, there is a spooky silence. The white wolf then lifted its head and let out a powerful howl that broke the stillness of the night. An oasis is located in the middle of the arid wasteland of a vast desert. A shape stirred and raised its head as it rested on a rock. A howl came down there, so strong that its ears twitched abruptly. It ran to the topmost dune of sand and turned to face the source of the howl. A closer examination revealed that the wolf's eyes had changed from bewilderment to recognition. It had relaxed from its startled posture to one of composure. Two others trailed behind it, curious about its unexpected actions. After glancing back at them, it turned back to the call's direction. It responded with an extended howl. A land shrouded in dense fog was also penetrated by the howl. However, the howl was met with a similar response as soon as it arrived. And then another and yet another until a multitude is thought to have joined the chorus. As the fog lifted, a large group of wolves of all sizes surrounded what looked like a large turtle shell caught in a net. Another wolf stood on top of it, but one might assume it was their leader based on how the others regarded it. A pair of ears were alerted by the howl that reverberated in a canyon. Among its pack, an elderly wolf raised its head. It also saw a young one growling and heard something else. It then observed that the majority were equally hostile to the call. However, a tiny rock struck its head, grabbing its attention. It looked in the direction it had been thrown and discovered a monkey perched on a ledge above them. Now the others were snarling at it. Apart from that, however, they were silent as they gazed at one another. The elderly wolf and monkey engaged in a silent conversation. Until the wolf made contact first, They remained steadfast. It was met with gaping maws and wide eyes from its pack when they heard a pounding sound. They turned to see the monkey pounding its chest when the monkey responded to the howl with one of its own. Their eyes widened even more. All had a look of shock, except the old wolf that had its head down with a look that seems contemplative. The howl was able to reach the peak of a tall mountain range. A big figure emerged slowly from a cave. A big wolf appeared. Observing what seemed to be its pack's expectant gaze, its body was covered in new scars, but it showed no signs of weakness. No, it only accentuated further its fearsome appearance. It observed a bull grazing leisurely on a nearby plateau. Deep in contemplation, it closed its eyes while some were tense and others were fidgeting. The others waited patiently for their leader to answer. In order to attract the attention of its pack, it opened its eyes and let out a loud bark. It howled loudly. Then the others, some hesitantly at first, joined in with their leader. The wind was blowing very hard. Yes, there's a storm coming. However, the wind only helped to carry all of their response. The howls reached the white wolf that was now racing through the forest. It wasn't isolated. It was followed by the wolves it had encountered before, but as time went on, more people joined the race just like them. Despite the tension, they showed no signs of animosity. They acknowledged the person in front of them as their leader and followed it. They encountered numerous challenges while running. The fallen branches and other debris that were strewn throughout the foliage injured a few. One was hit hard and would have died if the white wolf hadn't taken the chance of falling off the edge to catch it. However, they persisted in pushing through despite it. They came to a halt atop a snow-covered peak. They looked up at the moon. From there was a sense of dread in the air as the moon gradually turned crimson, shedding the same flaming light on the clouds. A pattern was slowly being carved by the formation of cracks. Many shivered in fear at this terrifying premonition. The white wolf, however, refused to back down. There was a strong resolve in its eye. It tensed its muscles, but not out of fear. In order to break their fear-induced trance, it turned to its pack and let out a loud bark. The dejected expression has swiftly given way to one of resolve. Recognizing their courage, the white wolf turned back to the moon. Next it opened the eye that had been kept closed, and a strong pressure swept through the region as it radiated a power as strong as the moon. Fukasaku, Shima, Uch. From where it lay inexplicably, a figure rose. It stretched for a while, then looked around at its new surroundings. It then explained what it would do next. Uki, now what? 3 years. So much time has passed since that fateful day. However, it had only been perceived as such by a select few on that especially gloomy day. Everything changed. Naruto was practically on his last leg when he brought the traitor back to the village. However, he was brutally captured. He was put in a detention cell meant for people like the Uchiha without even receiving medical care. The verdict was announced following that ridiculous pretense of a trial. Uchiha Sasuke would be placed on probation, arguing that his pursuit of the traitor was motivated by the cursed seal. For Uzumaki Naruto, he was to be executed for nearly killing a comrade through the use of excessive force. The force they claimed that would have consumed him to become what they had feared. They claimed it as justice, but it was nothing but biased favoritism. This was how Hinata Hyuga viewed the council. Sadly, many agreed to the verdict and the execution was held after a week in the public plaza, that all may witness the destruction of the village pariah and their hero is the best executioner. Are they blind? How pitiful that they required another person's eyes. Her only opportunity to see him was on the day he was to be killed. She was reluctantly grateful that one of the best shinobi was with them, even though security was practically impenetrable. She wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to help him escape, but she was chastised for doing so in front of the majority of the shinobi army. They had very few options and were obviously outnumbered. She can only afford to say goodbye one last time. They were able to enter the prison with the assistance of a few allies. She nearly lost her disguise when she noticed Naruto's injuries. She acted more convincingly by using her resentment of the villagers. Knowing that this would be her only opportunity, she gave it her all in the short time allotted. Those who wept were able to hide because it was pouring that day. She wanted to dash to the stage to stop it, to free him, to do anything. She knows she will never regret it. But a hand prevented her from doing it. Those who loved Naruto observed from a distance, as if they were all making fun of him for having nothing to do but watch him be dragged to his demise. Her heart was broken when she saw the person who had brought light to her darkness gradually fade away after the lightning strike. However, when his body was burned, her heart was subjected to yet another form of torture. Rain couldn't stop the fire from burning everything to ashes because it was so fierce. Ignoring all the applause, she was in a state of shock for a while. This was how she did it. Her heart wasn't into anything, but she carried on with her activities. The only thing those who attempted to console her saw was a hollow shell. However, that did not imply that she was no longer alive. No, she secretly considered going with him, but every time she gave it some thought, she saw him get up from wherever he had fallen. Even if he was grinning, her resolve gradually strengthened until she made the decision to stop letting anyone she cares about suffer because of her frailty. They were vastly outnumbered, and the village was obviously divided. They had no chance of stopping it. She had to tell herself, though, that she couldn't hold them all responsible for the existence of a third group. They were the ones who didn't appear to help him in any way. Just leave him alone. No glares, no treatments. According to what she saw, half of the shinobi citizens, including some of his generations, and a small number of civilians fell into this category. Being around them was bearable to her, but she grew to despise those who were closely connected to him. Even though she finds it repulsive, Sasuke was also affected by this. Now that he is out of his way, Naruto is seen as nothing because of his superior viewpoint. However, she thinks that he supported his execution, which makes him obviously one of the majorities. Through this experience, he hoped to obtain the Mangekyo Sharingan, a more powerful version of their clan's Kekkei Genkai that necessitates the sacrifice of a close friend. Something he utterly failed at. His pride prevented him from seeing that his path was pointless from the beginning. Her comparison of the entire Konohagakure society to a portion of it, her portion, or her family, was the reason. The main family was as conceited as the Uchiha and thought others were inferior to them. They see the few that capture their interest as rivals for dominance. They had been suspicious of Naruto after they saw their best clan member defeated. Despite the fact that he was from a branch family, they still saw him as a weapon, but they want to use that weapon, and they claimed their eyes see all, no less than everyone, I presume. She finds it disappointing that Neji went back to his pre-loss self. However, he has won the main family's favor and was even granted permission to learn their secrets, very similar to the council. Many members of the branch family claimed to have very little influence over the event, which is why they were neutral. Some were able to relate to her, but because they are members of the main family, they do not fully identify with her. It was difficult for them to break the tradition because it was deeply embedded in them. She considered her current position in all of this chaos. As she was leaving the clan compound, she stood out by herself because the main family didn't care about her. As a result, she no longer trusted her clan. "Will you be out long, Hinata-sama?" Except for Ko. Hiyashi had asked him to keep watch over her ever since her mother passed away. He resembled the members of the main family, she recalled. However, he gradually began to worry more about her well-being after he had assumed the majority of the duties. After her father had lost interest in her development, he acknowledged his mistrust of Naruto. However, he began to view him more favorably after realizing how much of a positive influence he was on her. He was one of the few people she could trust. After his death, he was the only person she could still consider family, in her opinion. "Maybe, I might be back later this afternoon. Then, take care, Hinata-sama." "Thank you, Ko." She started to go somewhere in particular, hoping not to stay any longer than absolutely necessary. She was constantly alert and aware of people around her. Because of her training, she recognized a specific chakra signature that was getting close to her. Evasion is less likely to occur unless she takes drastic measures because she recognizes the person right away. As the person walked next to her, she trained her emotions to be neutral. The figure broke the ice, knowing that she wouldn't be the first to greet them. "Hello there, Hinata. Good day, Hitaki-san." The anger she experienced that day was too much for her to bear after what he had disclosed. Those who were with them at the time had to restrain her from doing something she might not regret. It took her a year to come to terms that what Kakashi did was the only choice available, but seeing how remorseful he was, she compromised that he is an ally and he did not feel any obligations to further train Sasuke outside his schedule made him more bearable to her. They are now able to interact with one another. But the anger is still lingered. It was just better hidden. Now she may trust him, but that doesn't mean she will like it. "You don't need to be so formal, Kakashi will do." But when only silence followed, the Junin settled that another topic is best suited. "So, how are things going along?" "They are fine, thank you for your concerns." Though the appreciation did not match her expression. "Anywhere in particular you are heading out to?" "The usual place. Ah yes, I heard that they will be moving out once they get things settled. I wonder if Iruka would drop by. He may not visit them as often, but he is still a regular." Iruka had experienced comparable transformations. He became depressed and blamed himself for not doing more and made the decision to be stronger. Just like her, he asked her companion for advice. Kakashi eventually trained him. Given that Kakashi is on missions, she was unsure of the training regimen he had undergone. His most recent development, like hers, remained a mystery. "Is there something you need?" Her tone betrayed her annoyance, but her expression remained neutral. "No, just wanting to have a chat." She narrowed her eyes and asked, "Are you going to ask for it again?" Sigh, "I think I already know the answer, but just talking with you this way is enough." Knowing that no one else needed to know, she had trained covertly. Although she rose swiftly to the rank of Chunin, the silver-haired shinobi was aware that she concealed her actual rank. She changed over time. She was no longer the timid girl who hid in the shadows to conceal who she is. She turned into the very shadow. The only expressions the villagers saw of her whenever she interacted with them were, at best, blank and, at worst, fake only a select few are granted the ability to see both the good and the bad behind the icy mask. To put it mildly, you do realize I still don't like you? He had a slight slump in his shoulder and a hint of regret in his one eye, which he successfully concealed from the public. Yes, I do. He settled for the silence they both shared, whether he wanted it or not, knowing that this was the best conversation he could have with her. When they reached an intersection, the person who started it decided he might as well stop it himself. Well, I guess this is where we part ways. Without acknowledging anything, Hinata carried on with her journey. Kakashi continued to yell, "In case you meet up with Iruka, tell him that the test will be at my old training ground. He can bring her along if he wants to. A lot has changed. Would things have been different if it had happened differently? Naruto-kun." Achoo. Odd. From where did that originate? This is how the now living Arrancar saw his current situation. Oh well, it's getting a bit long and there's just another oddity to add to the list. He woke up 5 days ago, but it's unclear how long he was unconscious. In fact, he didn't move until the second day after he came to. He stayed lying there waiting, hoping that Lilynette would mysteriously pop out and manually wake him up in any humorously physical manner while berating him of lazing around. But Stark is aware that it may never happen again. Still, he wanted to try to hope. He made the decision to start moving the following day since he knew he wouldn't be getting anywhere like this. The first thing he noticed about himself was that his Arrancar clothes were back in order and he had returned to his sealed state. Observing that a hole in the chest was unusual, he muttered that he would prefer it otherwise. As he zipped up his jacket, he took off in an arbitrary direction, having no idea where he was or where to go. A rough voice called out next to him, "What's the matter? Caught a cold or something?" A few miles away from where he had been confronted by a group of ninja, whom he had defeated with ease earlier, he had met the man, who identified himself as Roshi. He sounded much older, but he was probably in his middle years. The man wore a purple robe with some armor. His face and head were covered in red hair, reminding him of another redhead, and the bridge of his nose had what appeared to be a metal strip. He wore a crown of some kind to hold his hair back, which made him somewhat like Barrigan, but he thought he was a better person. However, the symbol on it is identical to the plate of the people he assaulted. He initially remained vigilant because he thought he might exact revenge on his allies. Instead, he asked him to talk and then began to enter the forest. Whether it was because he didn't seem to have any bad intentions or because he didn't care at all, he went along there sitting around a fire, and something is cooking close to it. "I don't believe so, right? Whatever. Well, the meat's done any longer and the frogs can get a little chewy." A stick was given to him. However, he hesitated for a moment. "What's the matter? Don't like frogs?" he returned, and had the grace to appear somewhat sheepish as a result. "No, in fact I'll take this any day over those mud bricks they labeled as food." With his previous lifestyle, he had no eating issues. He recognizes the gluttony of Yami. He had witnessed Zale eat his own inventions. Aranyero's eating habits were essentially disregarded by him. He felt a slight uneasiness in his stomach, which he recognized as a hint of hunger, but he wasn't sure if he still needed food. It can get annoying, but not enough to impair his performance. He could also argue that they could have eaten worse given their true nature. Whatever. However, he was mistaken. He salvaged some wrapper bars which he believed as food, but after landing its first bite, he wondered how strong these people were to endure such terrible sensation. "I was just thinking of something, though, I'm not sure what," and he dug in, not noticing that his companion's eyes narrowed for a second. "Yeah, that's why I bring along week-old nuts and potatoes. It may still taste of dirt, but at least I know why." They continued with their meal in relative silence. "So, any luck with your soul searching?" They discuss various topics. According to the former prime minister, he was a soldier once, sort of, and is currently traveling to solve the puzzle of his dimly remembered past that has just begun to resurface. Though the entire story is so vaguely true that it didn't seem like a lie, Stark wasn't sure if that cover-up had persuaded him. Roshi, in turn, gave him a general overview of the area and even mentioned that both he and the people who attacked him were from Iwagakure until he learned about Konohagakure. Nothing still seemed familiar. Stark merely squinted slightly and thought hearing it made him feel a few things, but it didn't raise many issues. If the general knowledge wasn't enough, he had a suspicion that Naruto's memories are more focused on a personal level. However, when the Kyuubi was brought up, the memories he had of that time came flooding back. Only a cringe escaped his features this time. That was all he knew. And the only noteworthy fact was that the Kyuubi had attacked Konohagakure 15 years prior. Though he was too preoccupied to notice it, the silent thought was long enough to raise suspicions. "I'd say that 3 years have gone by, give or take a few months. That's totally arbitrary, not much, but it may come along the road of life." Despite being cautious of the stranger, Roshi believed that he could currently be trusted. He therefore loosened up a little and expressed his viewpoint. "The clothes may be fine, but the face might as well be lost in the crowd." Well, you do look like a noble with your fancy get-up, so maybe you belong somewhere. How many people with long brown hair do you know who exuded a sense of boredom? But if his abilities were any indication, he might be a noteworthy one after learning that his own shinobi had been beaten. You can count on the current Tsuchikage to burst a blood vessel. He was a blank slate just waiting to be messed up. Aside from his past, trust me, I'm far from noble and I doubt anybody will recognize me. He considered an item fastened in his sash and said, right, the rich bored guy look is very hard to miss. Nice sword by the way, though it doesn't look much. However, Stark gave him a stern look this time immediately. Roshi held up his hand in a conciliatory motion. Whoa there, it's nothing like that, it's nicely crafted, well maintained too, but other than that, I can see nothing special, he responded quickly. Stark lowered his gaze to the object when he awoke. The sword was with him, he had to be honest, though his Zanpakuto wasn't that, even though it was slightly more resilient than a real one. It was still a katana, although the sheath was more metallic gold in hue. The hilt and sheath are both yellow. Its blade was surrounded by a sun-like design on a gray rectangular guard. As he recalled how he obtained the weapon, his features softened. Maybe, but the one who gave it was, Stark. Z's. Nothing. The person in reference is seen sprawled on a pile of pillows, ignoring being shaken. Stark, Z's. Still nothing. If there was anything, the snore only got louder. Grr, Stark. Whack. Everyone felt, in one way or another, a scream that reverberated throughout Las Noches' farthest corners. That day, a range of sensations were experienced. Every man experienced a brief but intense feeling of dread, which some managed to conceal better than others, as well as intense sympathy, which some managed to conceal much better than others. Some women, however, felt content and that justice had been served. However, one specific woman is gradually retreating out of fear from the body that was slowly getting out of its floored prone position. Lee, Stark, Lee, I can explain. Net, WHAAA. Nobody was able to see the Las Noches version of tag because of the cramped area. How long the two halves were at it was not known because time had no meaning in Hueco Mundo. The taller of the two managed to seize the other by the shirt after an indeterminate amount of time. The only time it narrowed in anger was when she was lifted to eye level with him. What are you trying to do? I was trying to do something sensible. Was it sensible hitting something sensitive? I'm sorry, but you didn't budge? Stark had a short fuse and he finally calmed down after the numbing in his lower body started to go away. Then he saw that the girl's hands were clenched, and he thought that might be the offending appendage. He said, "Where you got the sword?" His eyes narrowed suspiciously, though, remembering the trouble she always brings. And whose is it? Lilynet had stopped wriggling by now. Hey, I didn't take it from anyone, she exclaimed. She lowered herself and responded in a quiet voice. Her anxiety was evident. This is for you. Not knowing what it meant, the Primera gave his intelligent reply, Come on, all the Espada has a Zanpakuto, so why not you? She reasoned. It doesn't bother me, besides, if needed, I'll just borrow yours. But you are the Primera, you need to keep the image of the most powerful. Sighing how his strange twin is being fussy, he tried reasoning in his also strange but reasonable logic. If power is appearance-wise, wouldn't someone like Berrigan be a better candidate? And how does borrowing become so degrading? But you're better than them. She now became quiet and looked very unsure. He wondered why she was so nervous and determined to give him the sword. She whispered, and they won't take you seriously if you keep getting a blade from someone weak. This surprised Stark. It was difficult for Lilynet to admit her weakness. Because she was associated with the strongest Arankar, no one could say it aloud. Words weren't necessary, though, given how some people denigrated her. According to the stories they've heard, the lower ranks avoided her because they didn't want to perish. The majority of powerful people, however, are appalled at how someone so weak became his Frasium. When they challenge her to prove herself, she never backs down, but in order to conceal her true nature, she was loud. She was by herself. He was also hurt by it. However, she was taking action to improve him and make him deserving of his position. She was worried about what other people would think of him, but Stark wouldn't have cared. The Primera studied his subordinate's dejected expression, her eyes displaying all the melancholy that followed her, their fears. Is it odd that one half of me cares about my own well-being? However, this is Coyote Starrk, and he didn't care about the minor flaws. She is being considerate, and they are two distinct entities. Her gloomy face instantly brightened as she said, "Fine, I'll take it." After taking the sword and appreciating its simplicity, he turned to face his significant other and couldn't help but laugh at how much they both value the gesture of giving the gift. Thanks. For a moment, the two hollows forgot where they were truly intended and smiled at each other in what is likely the rarest form of peace. Yeah, those punks you beat up, There's something special too. As much as I love my village, they tend to get things way over their head, but somebody has to bring them back to the ground, or there will be a new hidden village up in the clouds. He sensed an impending conflict 3 days after he began to move. If he had traveled with Sonito, he wouldn't be in this mess. However, he noticed some changes in his Riryoku when he woke up. He took the more manual route until he had a more secure location to test his abilities, because he is unsure of where he might end up if he uses his speed skill. He would have sensed them a mile away with his pesquisas, but he was limited to a few meters. When they confronted him, he wanted to just leave without problems, but they weren't having the same idea. He chose to test his Sonito in the midst of their attack. It was slightly lessened because his opponent could see a small shockwave and a blur from where he started. Apart from that, only the more skilled ones could stay on course, but not enough to get a good hit. Stark only used his fist, not his sword. He managed to control his Riryoku to minimize the effect, but he was unable to test his Hiero in this situation. They would have been outside if he hadn't, and even though they're already a problem, he didn't want a bigger one, though not as quickly as he had hoped. All 10 of them passed out. He took some money from the bodies, along with some of the wrapped bars, which he will later regret, and a black shirt after realizing that he might have to deal with civilization. Hopefully a friendlier one. Not trying to be a bad host or something, but I guess this is the time where you get going, that is before they start sending backups. I guess so, though I'm not sure where. The Arankar also took a map and said, "Give me the map, perhaps someone friendly could help," but he wasn't sure what good it would do if he didn't know where he was. Okay, let's see here. Well, you're somewhere around here. You don't want to go in this direction. Iwagakur's general direction is indicated, so you're left with going east with that teleporting thing of yours. You may reach somewhere habitable before nightfall. I may suggest you skip the first village over here. I heard nothing but bad news of it lately, so I suggest the next one. So skip one town and off to another. How will I know it's the right one? Beats me. All I know it's somewhere near a big tree. If not, well, go get lost. Stark turned to face the direction indicated by the red-haired hermit and said, "Fine, I'm off then." However, the aforementioned redhead called back before he left. "Just in case we're on opposite sides, I just want to say it was nice talking to you." He simply nodded, saying, "The same can be said, though in my defense. They started it, I disagree." Roshi laughed heartily as his friend vanished from view for the time being. He was still unsure of how he got it, but he said, "Well, this is the big tree, all right." That final cliff was just one step away from him. Before that, the river almost carried him away. And when he crashed into that boulder earlier, thank his Hiero. Indeed, Coyote Starrk was extremely fortunate. However, he isn't currently focused on that. Somewhere in the distance, he felt a stationary energy. He saw 4 people who were all unconscious and injured. When he got close to them, unaware of what transpired, he ignored it due to a new presence. He is moving away from where he is standing, and this one is very different. However, it was moving slowly until it came to a stop. He had a suspicion that this one had gotten away and spent all its energy. He made Sonito appear beside it. Shock took over all his senses when he saw the person on the ground. His thoughts paused, registering only 2 specifics. The individual wore white clothing and had green hair. There was only one thought for a brief moment. Lilynet. What struck me? Why did he think that having a Hiero equated to having steel skin? They had a natural tendency to harden their skin in order to protect themselves from harm to a certain extent. They just have to regulate more of their Riryoku to increase its hardness. This is the same for the former Primera Espada, though it could be due to the intensity of his Ryutsu prior to being in Arankar and to the time he did, which made the energy circulating inside him more powerful. Some of the more damaging attacks won't break the skin, but he might feel something remarkably. Anyone who strikes him in this condition might only experience a throbbing pain. Grimjow can simply kick him off a tower and through a wall, and all he will do is complain about how uncreative everything is in comparison to Lilynet. When he vaguely noticed a mop of green hair standing over him, he most likely thought that. He groggily tried to fall back asleep, saying, "Oh www, it's too early for this, Lilynet." However, the entire idea was ruined when he was yanked roughly up by the collar and forced to face a furious Lilynet like. "I ain't Lily, whoever. What do you want?" he said in a harsh yet low voice, giving the impression that he didn't want to draw attention, which, if he looked back, he might have done sooner. He began to wonder why this was happening, but the girl's angry face reminded him of the main point. The other day, he was surprised and perplexed to see his significant other in front of him. However, it was short-lived due to a few significant distinctions. Her skin, hair, and, now that she was facing her, her eyes were all darker. He examined her right away and discovered that her skin was free of any wounds or scratches. Seeing some of those blades strewn close to the other bodies and some cuts on her clothes made him think it was strange. There are only a few bruises, but when he looked closely at one, he noticed that they were getting smaller. He considered taking her for some medical assistance to the closest settlement. However, he suspected something first and foremost. Her chakra was more akin to Roshi's. I thought I forgot something, than those he had encountered. Like the hermit, she exuded a lot of energy and was equally chaotic. Her current state, which he is starting to recognize more, came next. His final clue came from his decision to use his pesquisas. Little to none of her chakra was present in the closest location where a sizable concentration was discovered. He discovered that her chakra was present in a number of nearby trees, some of which were more concentrated than others. He made the decision to take her to the one with the highest, which indicated that it was the more recent or used one. Fortunately, he arrived before it began to rain. The location was a hollowed-out tree that, given its size, could easily house them. He laid her on a large piece of cloth after noticing the few things inside, the bare necessities. By that time, he saw that some of her bigger bruises had lessened in size. If this Lilynet copy woke him up in the same way, he must have fallen asleep. Talking sense into her head was the only thing Stark could do to hopefully lessen the animosity. My social skills may be low, but I believe that asking, who might have come first, yes, it was sensible. He only received a tighter grip and a narrower glare. I don't care, it doesn't matter anyway. You all come for one reason or another, and being friendly is the last thing I can think of, so I'll ask another one. Why did you help me? He gave his interrogator a truthful response once more, because you look like you needed it. Which then leads back to the beginning. What do you want? He was beginning to understand why she was hostile. This caused his eyes to narrow thoughtfully. Your name? What? Their facial expressions are now reversed as the girl wasn't quite expecting that. To properly begin, answer the who, and I may give my reasons to why. You're serious? But by how little his mug has changed was making it hard not to believe. She shook her head and let him go just as roughly. You're really serious, or just not from around here, aren't you? More like I'm finding out if I had been here. Not sure though, but there was this tingling feeling somewhere, while waiting for the soreness to pass, which wasn't long due to the height of his drop. I'm not going to bother asking who you were, and so we're even. She grabbed a red bag from a corner and started stuffing anything she could get her hands on, no matter how little they are. So being a stranger, huh? That was useful, I suppose? I guess you're leaving then? As she filled her bag, the girl sighed in frustration and barely turned around. If you still insist. Just someone you had helped, and if you still want more. Thank you. There, happy? Well, that's very informative. As she went about her work, folding the cloth she slept on, she said, you really are not from around here, because you would have a bigger reason to even lend a hand. And my reason wasn't big enough. This man was intrigued by her abrupt halt to her activities but continued on gathering her things with some subtle changes he immediately noticed. There was silence for a moment, then she muttered, take my words, you're going to regret helping if you know what I am. He realized what she had meant based on his observations. I cannot regret anything unless I know why. He noticed how far away her eyes were. You won't understand. If it hadn't been abruptly interrupted, the silence would have continued. Well, what? She asked, obviously not sure what she was anticipating. He turned to face the girl, who deadpanned, you really are not from around here. He shrugged it off and said, if you say so, I won't push, though I kinda wanted to put, I'll be here when you need someone to talk to, but it seems we'll be going separate ways soon. He received an odd look. If she had known that this lazy bum actually had something to do, she might have said, you look like a lazy bum that have nothing better to do, so why bother? He guessed that this was the longest she had ever spoken to anyone in a long time because she turned back to her guest. She only saw a tall man with messy brown hair that was pulled back neatly, some hair on his chin that gave him an aged appearance, and blue eyes that were filled with boredom, but she can't get rid of the impression that there was more. He wore a fancy suit that was almost entirely white, complete with gloves and sandals. His black shirt, sash, and socks were all visible because he had left his jacket open. However, that final piece of clothing caused her to give this would-be nobleman another odd glance at what was dangling around his neck, a jawbone as an accessory. Really? She didn't express it, though now she saw the sword. If it was earlier, she would have been ready to use it against him, but oddly felt that he will not harm her now. Somehow, you got me right there. Should I also give my description of you? Don't bother, that's all you're going to get anyway. Stark may not look much, but neither were anything subtle that do catch his attention. He quickly noticed some minor changes in the girl's demeanor, including a less stiff gait, a smaller glare in her eyes, a slight softening of her speech, and how casual this had become. These changes led him to believe that the girl, to a certain extent, trusted him. He can't read minds, though, so he kept watching the girl pack the few things she had, which was taking a lot longer than it had before. His hostess fastened the bag on her back and put everything she needed inside, and if you're also those concerned softy type, you can see that I'm fine now, so you have nothing to worry about and you can be on your way now, she said to her visitor. She was standing at the doorway, but she glanced back curiously at the stranger, who had remained on the floor the entire time. He actually began to tuck his hands behind his head and lean back. Oddly, he felt as though she was expecting something. Well, aren't we going to go separate ways soon? He asked. He won't, however, force anything that isn't her choice. He has no right to stop her if she wants to go. As he settled in, he responded, "You're going." "I'm staying to nap a bit." However, he believed he heard someone murmuring something like, "lazy bum." Before she left, he inquired, "Is there a reason why you still prefer being a stranger?" Her back was to him when she said, "Like I said, you will regret helping once you know what I am." Despite the fact that she was facing away from him, he could tell that she had a melancholy smile on her face before leaving the shelter. I hope you would think it through." She bowed respectfully and departed after saying, "I already have, but I thank you for your concerns. I'll take my leave now. Keizkage Dono." The meeting had concluded in this manner in Sanagakure's most significant structure, the Keizkage office. A shinobi, once feared but now revered as their village leader, sat behind the desk of a very tidy room. He was wearing the robe that went with his new rank. His red hair and the kanji for love tattooed on his forehead were the only things that made him identifiable from the past to the present. He had teal eyes with black eyeshadows surrounding them as he watched his guest leave the office. What had once been a place of loneliness and bloodlust had become calm and calculating. This was Jichiriki, Sabaku no Gara, and Godem Keizkage from Ichibi no Tanuki. Shukaku, his siblings, Tamari and Konkuro, as well as his teammates, flanked him on both sides. He changed from destroying people to defending them after becoming friends with Naruto. He even adopted his friend's dream, but after that mission, everything was different. He put a lot of effort into getting to where he is now in order to exact revenge on his fallen comrade. However, he discovered along the way that if he didn't act sensibly, his village would suffer. As a result, he continues to maintain his connections to that village. When Konoha sent someone for diplomatic reasons, his siblings would have done a good job of hiding their hatred. It was always as brief as possible, but it was different this time. They made the decision to send someone who was somewhat related to him. Negotiations became more tolerable as a result. The most frequent was Hyuga Hinata, the former heiress of one of their well-known clans. He discovered the girl's deep affection for Naruto and the nuanced account of their treatment of her. He wanted to save his fallen friend in any way he could. Despite being the most powerful shinobi in the village, he is aware that there are risks he cannot afford. His sister interrupted his thoughts. "Gara, why are we still putting up with that village after all that they have done?" "Because of after all we had done, even though it was all because of that snake, the village is still held responsible as associates," was the Keizkage's collected response. Their village was almost dragged to the ground because of this traitor as well, but in the back of our minds, we wouldn't have realized his mistakes if it weren't for the invasion. However, once they cross paths again, mercy will not be spared, so that's where the gratitude ends. His brother, who had read the reports and had once supervised the village's reconstruction, said, "But we're stable enough, can't we ditch them and get an alliance from another village?" On the battlefield, Konkuro is recognized as a capable tactician. After all, this is a prerequisite for becoming a battle puppeteer. Politics, however, is a different kind of conflict. Maybe, but it is uncertain if we can hold up for a long invasion without doing something extreme. If we are to disband from Konoha, we need the alliance of one of the major village for us to pull through. Even Mizu seems preferable if they extend an agreement. Just as the puppeteer was about to suggest this plan of action, his younger brother identified a critical weakness. "But we should already cut our ties by then, or Konoha will catch wind of it, and we have no other choice but to extend the alliance with them. Giving them another place to put their filthy thumbs on." It's direct, but somewhat true. The oldest asked, "What was that you discussed with Hinata-san?" She mentioned that there was a topic that had nothing to do with their current alliance during the meeting with the Konoha representative. Both nodded in agreement. "You are aware how much Naruto meant to her." When the two older siblings saw that Gara appeared uncertain, they both became anxious. Since most of Konoha think otherwise, she and some are being mistreated. He is capable of controlling his emotions, but if he expresses them in any way, it is a serious matter. So I extended to her a proposal. "So what was it?" They awaited Gara's response. However, they looked at him incredulously. They became aware of their brother's proposal after seeing all the signs. Next. "What? A marriage proposal? Have you finally gone insane?" How is that going to help? Gaara had a very rare experience of being reprimanded by an older sibling for doing something stupid, even though he claimed it wasn't. He remained silent as he collected his thoughts on how to explain it to them. They both calmed down and appeared to understand where this was going. I don't know, think about it, if her clan shares the same view, she will clearly be persecuted. It is possible that she will be or already an outcast with no other privileges other than to be married to someone for the clan's prestige. However, they let him go on. Being a cage, I can fit the qualification and at least get her out of there. I consoled her that we will only be married in name and I can free her if at once she is a citizen of Suna. Tamari worriedly asked, what did she say? But she now realized that Gaara was merely attempting to assist. She declined it. As the most careless of the three, Kankuro is all for taking chances if there is even the slightest possibility of success. But why? Sure, it's a drastic move, but she can be free from that dirt hole, right? They both nodded once more. Remember our discussion about allying with other villages? The same principle is also applied with her. She doesn't want to put my title at risks to give her clan more standing. The possibility of the clan's pressure for power is also present, but I will be damned if even think of letting that happen. They now understood that she didn't want them to get tangled up in any of their mess. Such a sacrifice was greatly respected. Too bad most of them didn't think so. There is another way, and that is more drastic. They were both aware of what would happen if she managed to get away. Nuke Nin. Indeed, but it will be difficult. We can only hide her here for so long until Konoha acts up, that is if she is able to reach here. As they considered it and hoped she would receive the assistance she was due, they all kept quiet. This is so screwed. I'm not sure how this is going to sound, but she is an honorary Jinchuriki. This statement is blunt as usual, but it gets right to the point. The power of a human sacrifice, yes, I have to agree with that. Stupid. She had been thinking about this all morning. It was all because she paused and remembered the man after traveling a certain distance from her former home. She might not say it aloud, but she found their conversation to be somewhat enjoyable. Having someone to talk to without fear of instant judgment was a pleasant feeling. He actually made her think of someone who supported her despite who she was. However, she refrained from thinking about it further because it remained that way due to his ignorance of it. She makes an effort to treasure any small act of kindness before it all turns against her. However, she can't help but believe that this individual might comprehend. He exuded both strength and burdensomeness. But her inner turmoil of the matter was interrupted by an outer one. She immediately sensed that she was being pursued. Scolding herself for staying too long in the open, she plucked a leaf and blew on it. A whistling sound escaped from it. Then a tiny, dark mist began to form all around her. However, this mist turned out to be a swarm of insects. When examined more closely, the swarm scattered behind her with a wave of her hand, and then it began to scream in the forest. She leapt from the branch right away, initiating the chase. She kept running through the tops of the trees. However, she was eventually apprehended by her assailants. Since they were merely common grunts, she was able to repel them. But due to their numbers, she was too busy to notice the projectile that hit her from behind. She stumbles to the forest floor. After falling, she had just managed to avoid another projectile, which she discovered was water. Before he could catch her breath, they have the necessary weapons, and the area is damp from last night's rain. She started running through the forest floor, dropping her things for easier mobility. When more of them appeared, she leapt over them with grace and struck a few heads. She puffed up her cheeks and made some hand gestures. Hiden. Rinpungakure no Jutsu. As she made her getaway, she released a cloud of fine powder that ignited into a flash that momentarily blinded them and disabled a few. She was able to continue running because of her immense energy. However, she was thrown a few yards before she caught herself by an explosion on her right. However, she had enough time to be caught by the others. Some began to hurl shurikens and kunais, but her arms deflected them all, and those that struck her body simply bounced off. She charged into the battle and began slamming into whatever was in her path. Finally, we got her where we wanted. She felt something grab her left wrist before she could figure out where it was coming from. After that, she was violently pulled and slammed against a nearby tree. She reported feeling pressure on her right hand once more and noticing that two water-based cords surrounded her wrists. She was ready this time, but she still felt like she was being jerked. She leapt toward the pole and, as she got closer to the ground, planted her feet. Her feet left shallow trenches as she was dragged along, bracing herself with strength that was unmatched by her build. It was her turn when the poles weakened, and she yelled as she pulled two figures from the trees. The binds on her hands break, allowing them to catch their fall before they crash on the forest floor. She became aware that they had compelled her to stand close to a tiny body of water. She turned to face the two shinobi, keeping her eyes open. They were both men, one tall and muscular, the other short and wearing a mask over half of his face. She was aware of these two. They went with Suin, the village trader. She doesn't care much about that, though, because they were trying to take the village at the time. She had no duty to rely on it because she was abandoned outside the village when they last visited. She simply observed from the tops of the trees, but when the whole mess was sorted out, they tried seeking to punish her for not doing her task. That's where she developed the need to change shelters to confuse them. She easily escaped each encounter and they stopped bothering her. But what do these idiots want with me? Well, you gave us quite a chase there, girl. A new voice permeated the area, but this was feminine. The final member, a woman with an open blue shirt, stepped out from behind a tree. Why are you back? With a sneer in between, the woman laughed and answered nonchalantly. Be honored, we came back for you. They could tell she didn't understand by the confused expression on her glaring face. Suan-sama managed to inform us that the hero water wasn't the only secret weapon of Takigakure. However, it was the easier one to obtain. We were pressed on time, that he didn't resort to get the more powerful one. The seriousness of the situation was conveyed by her shocked expression. That's right, now you understand. It took us a while, but I think we're ready for another invasion now. Why don't you come along and help us out? She hardened her posture and returned her glare over my dead body. Without feeling sorry, she said, he did mention that its power is connected to your life. So sorry, but we need you alive. The kunoichi were already forming seals when the girl charged her. The water around her erupted and began to splash at her. A torrent of water from the nearby pool crashed into her, pushing her back and carrying her into a tree. She left a mark on the tree when the water subsided, but she remained upright despite having darker, nearly black skin now. In response, the other members of the group threw yet another round of blades. She swatted some of them away and got ready to brace the others. However, when she saw that some of them had papers attached, her eyes widened. She was thrown into the body of water by the explosion and struck it with a forceful splash. The water around her begins to violently shift as she breaks the surface to catch her breath. The next thing she knew, the one wearing the mask was holding up a water sphere that encased her. She was still confused by the blast, and she was gradually losing consciousness as her body grew heavier and more oxygen depleted. She was aware that she needed to leave, even though she had no idea what they were saying outside. Only one path remained. RRRAAWWWRRR. When her warden sensed his prisoner's dangerous chakra, he immediately released the prison and made his way to the coast. However, when the prison exploded, he was violently thrown along with a strong shockwave that sent waves around the lake. The girl's glare had turned into something more savage. Encasing her was a dark green shroud of chakra, flaring out a portion of what was imprisoned in her. The chakra seems to shape a long prominent horn on her head, and a tail that's shaped like an insect wing protruded from her back. She swiftly charged back, but this time fighting with more ferocity. She nearly disseminated half the gang, when another water whip wrapped around her neck, but it slowly evaporated due to the heat her aura exuded. She linked the woman to it abruptly. She materialized before her, her hand piercing the woman's abdomen. However, she exploded in a puff of smoke. A log covered in explosive tags was impaled by the beastly girl's hand. She was thrown across the battlefield and struck another tree after being engulfed in an explosion. Once more she stumbled back up, but her anger increased slowly. A second tail developed. She became airborne as the two tails began to beat quickly. Even though she was now depending more on instinct, she was aware that those three were the most dangerous. She noticed the woman standing on a branch across from her. After receiving a water needle to the face, she didn't think twice and flew directly in her direction until they crashed. However, the woman substituted herself with a log, just like before. Now, metal wires ensnared her before she could react, causing her to lose control of her flight and crash against multiple branches. Before landing on the ground, she struggled, but the wire became more tangled and held her in place. She became aware of multiple tags fastened to the wires as soon as she sensed something draining her. Got her. Looks like the bug fell in our web, exclaimed the other man, who was holding one end of the wires. These chakra-absorbing seals cost a fortune. Forget how much we paid to get the gang back, but like they say, if you want to win some, you got to lose some, and you're going to help us win it back. She has persisted in her struggle and defiantly refuses to be subdued. Shit. She will overload the seals. In his free hand, sparks began to form as he grasped the wire. Lightning streaked in the direction of the girl. Strong volts ran through her body as she screamed, filling the forest. When it ceased, she sagged helplessly as the chakra shroud gradually faded. Unbelievable, she's still awake. Maybe Aneth. Wait. Look. When she saw something strange about their prey, her companion's hand began to sparkle. Her eyes were wide because she could see the lightning, but her muscles were stiff in their line of work. She had encountered a lot of faces. She also recognized this expression, which made her smile wickedly. Well, how do you like that? It seems we discovered our new weapon's little weakness. But before she could think about it, she heard a number of thuds and gasps coming from behind them. Another half of their group was lying on the ground when they turned around, whereas a swordsman in white stood before them. Now I got your attention. Might I ask why is she tied up? The masked one yelled, "You, get lost. This is none of your business." Instead, he cast his sight towards their hostage and gave a disapproving look. "I kinda patched her up, so I'm somewhat responsible for her health. Thought I'm far from being a doctor." She hoped that at least they would part ways amicably and that he wouldn't find out about her secret until she was dead. "What are you doing here? Go away," she exclaimed. The person holding her binds yelled, "Shut up, bitch," and would have struck her if his female companion hadn't intervened. The kunoichi saw the tightened grip on the sword right away and intervened to prevent her teammates from making a stupid move. "Wait. Let me handle this." She turned back to the intruder and smiled in a way that was convincingly pleasant. She ignored their frowns and said, "Forgive their rudeness, they're not very civil in about anything." But now it was her turn to be cut off. "My social skill is very low, so skip the pleasantries and let her go." "Oh, right down to business," she said in a smooth voice. "After you were corrected of a misconception, may I interest you in something?" However, it was clear from the way the sword-wielding hand tightened that he was losing interest. "You really don't know what this is." His uninteresting response was, "A powerful girl who is bounded by a bunch of thugs." The woman chuckled and then gave him a questioning glance. "Powerful? Yes, but she is far from being just a girl. In fact, with the power she has, she could no longer be human. The power she has can destroy anything in its path. She is a weapon, a monster. This is Takigakure's Jinchuriki that holds the power of one of the Biju, the Nanabi." In response to this statement, a thin brow was raised. "A monster?" The girl's despairing thoughts were, "There." She closed her eyes and started crying. Without realizing it, she bided her time until the nearest thing recognized her as a human being and rejected her as well. Everyone was taken aback by the captive's statement. "I still see as a girl that is struggling to live." The way he spoke suggested that she is the least of their concerns. "But if you insist nevertheless, you may want to downgrade your description to that of a beast, because she is doing what any would have done in her predicament. To defend and survive, and you are subduing her just like one." He started with monsters. However, his eyes were far away as he reflected on his former self. "They have powers and use them to take down all who crosses them. They do whatever they want, take whatever they want, disregarding how those around them will be harmed by its actions." He thought Naruto tried his hardest to refute the names they all gave him, but he's no longer there. What many had thought of him, of what he had become, stands in his place. "Isn't that what you are doing right now? I have met some." He looked back at them. Nothing about his gesture or posture changed, but his stare unnerved those around him, as though he were being stared down by 100 enemies, leaving them to face their fate alone and die alone. "But this is only one man." That alone snapped the taller male to ignore his instinct. "Enough of this bullshit. Get high." They all began to gasp for air, so he never completed it. They were forced to buckle in order to stand because of the heavy weight bearing down on their shoulders. All the remaining brutes around them immediately dropped like flies. Only 4 people were still awake, and they are obviously having difficulty staying that way. They appeared to be drowning on dry land, and as they struggled to breathe, sweat trickled down their brows. In fact, they all looked up to what they thought was the cause of this unbelievable pressure. Like flames, blue energy emanates from him. However, the game their eyes are playing with them is more frightening than that. "I could have been one, a predator." That is, what appears to be a snarling beast's face hanging overhead, staring down at the prey it will soon eat. "And still can. Ah, Sweden. Sweden." The masked shinobi's motivation for confronting the stranger, despite its futility, was desperation. The swordsman appeared to be swallowed by a towering column of water that surged towards him behind the mask. A manic smile appeared on his face, but as he bent over to the shape of the fist that was implanted in his stomach, it became a gaping grin. The fist is attached to the white being by the other captors. They yelled, "Kirasame." As the body fell out of his grasp, the taller one took the initiative to realize that if he did nothing, his escape would be in vain. He tightened his grip on the wire and continued to restrain the captive. He might choke her or even break her neck, but that was the last thing he wanted at the moment, even if she wasn't cut. "Don't come any closer or ill." He was cut off once more as he released his grip on the wires and was hurled into the air by a red force that struck his chest. In less than a minute, everyone was taken down by this fiend, and the only woman present watched in shock. She realized that everything was lost as he stood there with his arms still extended. However, a hand lifted her throat and the rest of her above the ground. Before she could escape, she linked the hand to the swordsman, whose expression remained unchanged now that the beast is staring back at her. She is frozen in terror and her eyes are playing tricks on her once more because of the pressure he continued to radiate. She was only able to mumble the word, "Momon," before passing out. He kept looking blankly at the now captive captor. "Good, now you are corrected of a misconception." He abruptly stopped talking to the woman and everything else. He then turned back to the one he came to rescue. He approached her slowly. While she continued to stare at him, she snapped out of her stupor, but didn't move due to the restraints. However, he noticed that she was apprehensive and somewhat afraid. He tried to reach out and take out the wires while kneeling in front of her. Her muscles tensed, and he saw it right away. He sighed and halted his advance. "I give you my words, I won't harm you." She became noticeably more at ease, but she continued to watch him as he used a nearby kunai to cut the wires. He considered how to relocate her to a more secure location after her rescuer was finished. She is obviously weak, and it might take her some time to recover before she can stand. He offered to carry her by presenting her with his back. She proceeded without hesitation, which surprised him. Then he and his passenger left. "Why, you really want to know?" he asked, interpreting the motion on his back as a yes. Sigh, "I'll be honest, at first, it was out of guilt. I lose someone who is like a sister to me. In fact, you look like her with a tan. I lose my memory somewhere, and I was alone before I met her. You can say she was on the same boat. That's why we got stuck together." She felt empty. Even though his help was by far the best she had ever received, she still felt like a replacement. Nobody gets it. Although Stark was unaware of it, she was drawn to the statement. "But when I got to know you, you are really much like her and me. When I started to regain my past, I learned it wasn't much different than my present. It was shrouded by loneliness of what I become. You may think of it as pity, but who has a better chance of understanding than those who has been there? I met others too, with a burden that few were willing to understand alone. Because of it, that is why I helped." She cried out all the grief she had suppressed for years, digging deeper into his clothing because she could no longer contain it. "For you, how long has it been? If I can feel it under my shirt, it's probably a lot." He remained silent until he assumed she was feeling better. In an attempt to find her, he picked up the bag he had passed. "Here are your things. I can drop you off at your place and stay for a while, if you like, then I'll be going." He muttered to his present passenger. "Come again? Ca, can I go with you, please?" Sounded more audible but remained soft. Although he liked the company, he had to be sure, wouldn't it cause problems to your home? "I have no one to return to call it home." This saddens him and feared what he was about to ask next. Then the problem with traveling with someone like me. The former Hollow may have hid it, but he too felt fear of how others may react to him. That was after all why he had been living in solitude. Then shouldn't that mean that our kind should stick together? This time with a familiar eagerness. The tension on his back instantly eased as he said, "Sai, if you are anything like her, and Naruto, stopping you is going to be very problematic." To meet her, he wished his sister was present. With a slight smile on his face, he thought, "You two would have gotten along just fine." They carried on, leaving the forest. When she asserted that she could now walk, she was lowered now that he had a companion. Stark realized that he would once more be traveling by hand. However, he believed he could handle it. "So, where are we going?" "Well, isn't this sentimental?" However, he had somewhere to go this time. "Somewhere? And what are we going to do?" Something." She deadpanned. "Well, that's very informative." It then reminded him of their initial exchange. Coyote Starrk, but Stark will do. She grinned because she could finally be called what she truly thought she was. "You can call me Fu." A group discussion was taking place in a cavern where light seemed to never penetrate due to the darkness. Even though the location is unsuitable for any kind of gathering, the 9 figures ignored this and carried on. One said, "So, how long till we can get this show on the road, The member who appeared to be the shortest responded in a raspy voice, "A plan takes time, be patient." The others can picture the eyebrow twitching as the inevitable happens. And this is coming from someone who can't wait to get anything done, He countered, "As long as the deadline is met, I will manage." Enough. They were all focused on the person leading this gathering. Its eyes were as clear as day, but its body was likewise indistinguishable. They had rings around them and were gray. Its gaze exuded strength and a desire for order. Regardless of the means, these were the eyes of the legendary god of shinobi, the Rikudo Sennin, who founded their world and way of life. The operation will proceed in due time. Is there any updates of the whereabouts of the Kyuubi? With all the disrespect in his voice, one yelled, "Why the hell are we still looking for something that is 6 feet under with its coffin?" "Shut up, Hidan, or I'll kill you," scolded someone else who was equally eager to make amends. "Bah. Like any of you fuckers can." There was a tall person who laughed, letting the others know that it was lined with abnormally sharp teeth. "Hey, Kakuzu. How about stitching that mouth of his? That would be a laugh, for us." "Mind if I blow it up, replied a cheeky remark. "Silence," he said, this time with annoyance, and everyone immediately noticed he answered their questions, ensuring that there would be no more needless interruptions. "You all must know, no matter how powerful the seal is, the Biju will be free once its prison dies, though the more powerful ones will scatter its chakra, it will rematerialize in time. It will use the chakra in its surrounding to reform its body, faster if it is of its own or of equal potency. The tallest participant chose to speak on this specific topic. The person with the oddest silhouette nodded. Yeah, but wouldn't it be noticed by now? Samahata tracked down some of the leftover in some places. But the most is still in Konoha. Even Zetsu have the same problem. The leader continued his explanation after acknowledging this remark. That is correct. Reports of its sighting or at least a disturbance due to its re-emerging should have been detected, but based on Kisami's and Zetsu's report, the areas with its chakra residue remained unchanged. It's possible that the Kyuubi itself is still intact and sealed in secret. Keep an eye on Konoha for any leads, but remain aware of the other possible sites. Oh, fucking great, a wild fox chase with a few red herrings. All of them disregarded this and awaited the orders. The plan will commence soon. You all know what to do. Keep on a lookout for the Kyuubi. It will be sealed last. Continue collecting information and funds till you all will be summoned again. Dismiss. Then, all but one of them disappeared from their position. The person they called Zetsu remained in that spot until a new figure unexpectedly materialized in front of him. It commanded, "Zetsu, report." With a double voice, Zetsu replied, "It happened again, but this time more potent." "By how much?" the figure asked, hardly showing emotion. With equal uncertainty, one said, "I am not sure. It was not like anything we came across before. We can't explain it, but the closest we can compare it is like one of the bijus." As he absorbed this information, one eye narrowed. "I see, a new player has entered the field. Where was it last located this time?" Though longer than last time, it just as quickly vanished, leaving no trace behind. "Disappointing, but I'll deal with this later. Continue with your watch." Zetsu bowed and was gradually absorbed by the earth until he vanished. "My goal is getting closer. My prize will not be obstructed by anyone," but it was his. There was no one to see how its blood-colored eye flared. "Well, this is it. It was all in vain. After everything I had done, most of the people I thought were with me turned their backs on me. Finally, knowing who will miss me at the end makes me sad. I became oblivious to those who were important because I wanted to be accepted by everyone. I suppose my blindness and loneliness were also my fault. It's funny that I'm not the only blind person here. Even with half a mind, I know it would be pointless after what he said about those damned eyes. So he's here at last. I suppose it will be my last triumph if he continues to do it. That jutsu. The thunder makes a convincing drum roll, so why not use it in this weather? Come on, give it to me." What is the matter with him? No matter how much he pretends to be sorry, I doubt he would ever be. Chidori. Wait. Who was his eye? I'm sorry. The racket that ensued that night rudely interrupted the Espada's sleep. Given the intensity of the rain, Stark congratulated himself on choosing to rent a room as he peered out the window. He needed some extra money because he is now traveling with Fu in order to at least buy her some food, and perhaps some other items as well. As a result, they earned money by performing some menial tasks in that last town, which he recognized. They also acquired it in some strange ways, something like Tanzaku. Thus, they had to travel along well-known routes, ideally avoiding Konoha too soon. However, he kept a close eye on the pitch-black sky, particularly the flashes that illuminated it and the roars that followed. Sigh. I guess I now know why thunderstorms bother me. However, his attention was suddenly drawn to Fu's bed. He could hear her trying to hold back a sob. In addition to the fact that she was tossing in the sheet, he was reminded of the times Lilynette dreamed about their previous life without realizing it. Like her, he recognized the girl's vulnerability beneath that tough facade. "Fu, it's all right, I'm here." The girl's eyes opened instantly, and she clung to life when she saw someone she knew. She kept crying as he consoled her. "It's just a bad dream." "No, it happened a long time ago," she rasped out. After a while he saw the signs that it was unpleasant, however, prior to his attempt to soothe her. "I had a brother. He knew what I am, but he still stayed with me. He kept me safe and he was always there for me. But one day, while we were guarding the village, we were attacked by enemy ninja. They were all ganging up on us. He told me to go back while he held them. I know he is strong, but I couldn't leave him." Stark tried to comfort her even though he already had a suspicion about what had happened. "Then, someone shot a lightning. It was coming straight at me. I couldn't move no matter what. It will hit me, but it didn't, because he took it." She remained there. He knew that Fu was remembering something painful by how strong she is holding on to him. "I gave in to its power. I tore them apart, but it was too late. He was dying. The last thing he saw was a monster. But do you know what he said? 'You are my sister, someone worth dying for, and I hope that one day you will find someone worth living for.' Even till the last breath, he still stood up for me." That clarified why she was afraid of lightning. It was capable of more than just minor harm. It also evoked unpleasant memories. "I didn't realize how similar we are. the Primera didn't know what he was doing, but he decided to offer the same comfort when Lilynet felt like this, never releasing the embrace. He crawled into bed with her so till the break of dawn. He never left her side. Wow, this bridge is amazing, it's huge. Yeah, I guess. Despite the fact that the trail he followed led them to Konoha, he decided to follow a different one that took them in a different direction. This led them to the tiny nation of Nami. Memories started to clutter the Arrancar's mind and were hoping to be answered at the end of this bridge. But what caught their attention was what was engraved above them, the Great Naruto Bridge, why named after a fish cake. Stark wasn't sure how this happened, but he decided to hope for an answer when they got to town. It seems to be named after the hero of Nami. From what he remembered of this place, this was where Naruto, he went on their first serious mission, and dangerous too, but by the look of the place, it seems to do a lot better than what he recalled. But his companion cut him off in his reverie. I'm hungry, can we go get something to eat first? He complained, almost forgetting how enormous her appetite was. Fine, keep your. What stopped him then? And there was a very strange sensation. He caught a whiff of something so distant, yet so familiar that it weighed on his mind. Stark followed this memorable scent, with a confused food trailing behind him. Once he reached where the smell is strongest, his eyes widened in disbelief. Because the sanctuary that contained the majority of Naruto's few happy memories was in front of him. Standing before him was the Ichiraku's ramen shop. Though there were many notable changes, he still recognizes the aroma of the food that nearly sustained Naruto, him in the past, but he enjoyed ramen for other reasons as well. Silently, he was hoping to see them again as he entered. The place was larger compared to how he remembered and now had separate tables. However, given that it was still early in the morning, it was deserted. He was taking in the familiar yet unfamiliar surroundings when he noticed someone. Good morning, I guess you sure love ramen to be the early birds. He quickly gazed on one of the few who treated him like a person, Ayame. He heard Naruto's voice in his memory. He nearly acted on how much he missed her, whom he saw as a sister, but he just gave an embarrassed, yet polite greeting. He winced as he felt pain on his foot, and it didn't take a genius to figure out who was responsible. Oh, good morning too. Actually, we just arrived in town and we're hoping to find breakfast. Ayame, however, appeared amused by the stunt. Well, the broth is almost done so it won't be long, so why don't you two have a seat? They did so and took theirs near the counter. So, what are we having this fine day? He pondered and recalled Nato's favorite flavor. Fu hadn't had one, so it might as well be accepted. 2 miso, please. Coming right up, she exclaimed with joy as she went to the back, where he undoubtedly heard the elderly man he remembers with fondness. Do you remember this place? Fu obviously noticed his gesture. She is aware on the purpose of his travel he might have added a little more personal information, but he told her exactly the same thing he had told the Iwa hermit. He was still unsure of how he would identify the more bizarre ones when he chose to tell her everything. He was grateful when Fu said she would wait and would travel with him until then. I suppose she will be shocked to learn that I actually died. Just as Ayame came back with their orders, he remarked, yes, it held many happy memories back then. Here they are. She smiled and said, the bowls that started the day. The bowls of noodles were set in front of them, and as Fu hurriedly started eating, he carefully examined each bite. It was simple, but it was flavorful, and the taste brought back memories of when Naruto's smiles were real. He now realized why, if given any other food, he always chooses ramen, not just because it's convenient, but also because it reminds him of the people who welcomed him. Ayame, who smiled with warmth that kept his heart from freezing, and old man Tucci, who took him in and gave him a sense of a family. Arrk. Stark. What's the issue? When he finally heard Fu's desperate call, he noticed that the waitress was also staring at him with concern. What are you saying? I'm all right, as Ayame pointed out, but you're crying. He wiped his eye and saw the moisture on his glove. Yes, I guess I am. He concluded that an explanation would ease the tension based on their anxious expression. It's just that I was reminded of a time when I didn't have a home, he said. Well, I still don't, he said, recalling his friend and looking into her expectant eyes. Make that too. However, I do recall who took this stray, and even after learning what I had become, that didn't stop them. He saw Fu's slight recoil. Ayame was still staring at him, but he saw a softening of her expression, perhaps out of sympathy, but it was enough for him to know that their opinions of Naruto hadn't changed. This was further demonstrated when he eventually spotted a picture frame of Naruto and the Ichiraku family in one corner. There is nothing I could ever do to make up for the generosity they showed this idiot. I already have, but I wish I could do more. I simply want to see them again. So why not think of this place as your home? This time, Tucci, an elderly man, joined in the conversation. Based on his tone, he heard everything, which sparked yet another reason why Naruto adored this group of people. Hey Naruto, Why don't you think of this as your home since you don't have one? With a slight smile on his face, he bowed his head and said, "Thanks, I appreciate it." Following their meal, he bid them farewell and personally promised to return if circumstances allowed. He managed to sort through the confusion of memories related to this location and selected one in particular that he wanted to see, and Fu silently followed, understanding that this place held special meaning for him. He asked for some general directions and then let his sense of familiarity lead him. His pesquisas picked up someone along the way, and he decided to confront it later unless it was hostile, even though he wasn't sure of their intentions. He eventually arrived at it, which was exactly as Naruto remembered. 2 wooden posts that serve as markers for the plain graves, but what revealed who was behind them was the huge sword that stabbed behind one of them. The Kabikirabocho, the sword of the once dreaded demon of the hidden mist, Zabuza. The other is then unknown, unless you were there when they were buried, Haku. Are you familiar with them? Yeah, companions? Well, kind of the positive kind of, because I learned something from them. When a person has something important they want to protect, that's when they can become truly strong. Fu was about to break her silence before Stark beat her, but she did so out of respect, but it was becoming unsettling. If I need true strength, that's what he told me. Haku, what would you say if you saw me now? And you were right to believe that your brother is strong. I failed once, but I won't make the same mistake again, he said, turning to face Fu, who was giving him her whole attention. Seeing this aspect of the sluggish but formidable warrior still made her uncomfortable. Do you need some time alone? The Primera cringed in his mind at the thought, but he knew that it would be necessary right now. Are you able to get what we need in town? He gave her some of their money and nodded in response. I'll find you when I'm done, he said. Her aura is easy to locate, and he knows she can handle most problems, but when things get out of hand, he told her to flare her chakra, and you know what to do just in case.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.